Slow Trek to Triumph, Book 5 in a Sunburned Land series, written by Juliette Duncan, narrated by Sarah Kennedy.
Chapters 1 to 10.
Chapter 1. Frank could hardly keep track of the changes occurring in his life and that of his family, but this latest change brought a smile to his lips every time he thought of it. His youngest son, Joshua, had married Stella, and they were now living at Indigo Downs, the cattle station Stella's family had owned and lost, and which Joshua had purchased back for her as a wedding gift. The couple had left for their honeymoon right after the wedding, and since then, Frank had resumed the role of managing Goddard Downs, a role he was more than familiar with. He was, however, finding it difficult to rouse himself each morning, something he'd never had a problem with before. Perhaps it was the lingering heartburn that had been troubling him in recent times, but more likely, it was simply that he didn't want to leave Maggie. Whenever his gaze settled on his beautiful wife's sleeping form, he was tempted to stay with her and not go to work. He was getting soft in his old age. In the short time Joshua had been running things, Frank and Maggie had settled into a routine of long breakfasts on their deck, followed by a Bible reading and a prayer time. Returning to the helm had all but ended that. Maggie had been more than understanding and never grumbled or complained, but he knew she was missing their time together as much as he was. But that morning, as he sat down for a quick breakfast, he made a decision. He took her hand across the table and rubbed it gently with his thumb. She lifted her gaze and gave a bemused smile. "My love," he said, "I think we should take that trip." Her eyes shot open. "Now?" "Yes." He looked deep into her eyes that flickered with confusion. "What about the station? All the work that has to be done? We still haven't found a vet to replace Stella, nor an extra hand to help with the drives." He lifted a finger to her lips and hushed her. "Shh, my love. All those things can be figured out. We need to take time for each other while we can. The station will survive without me for a while." He squeezed her hand and lifted it to his lips, kissing it gently. "I want us to spend time together, Maggie. Just you and me before we get too old. What do you say?" She stared at him for a long moment, their gazes locked, before she replied. "I'd love to, Frank, so long as you truly think you can afford the time." "I'll make sure I can," he smiled, the delight in her expression warming his heart. "Broom it is, then?" She nodded eagerly. "Why don't we make a road trip of it? I'd love to be able to take our time and enjoy all the sights along the way." "Funny you should say that. I just happen to have been working on the perfect rig." "Oh?" she said, her brows furrowing. He chuckled. "Come down to the workshop later and I'll show you." "Okay." She leaned forward and searched his eyes as her own danced with merriment. "How long have you been planning this, Frank?" He grinned. "Well, since the day we met." "Oh, go on with you, Frank Goddard. Seriously, how long?" He leaned back in his chair and sipped his chamomile tea. He'd gone off coffee recently after finding that Maggie's herbal teas soothed him better. He'd even started enjoying the flavour. He stared out across the lagoon where a family of ducks was enjoying an early morning paddle. When had he started planning this? Good question. Julian's sudden death had made him realise once again that no one, other than God, knew how many days they had left on this earth. That day, as they lowered his eldest son's body into the ground, he'd made a decision to cherish every day, to take pleasure in life and to spend as much time with Maggie and his family as he possibly could. He didn't want to live his life with regret. He faced her and drew a slow breath. "Since Julian's funeral." Her expression sobered, and an understanding passed between them. Words weren't needed. She knew how much Julian's death had affected him, but God was gracious, and although he'd never fully get over his son's death, he, along with the rest of the family, was learning to live without him. "I'll make some more tea," she said. He smiled. "Thank you, my love. That would be great. And then maybe we can do a bit of planning before I head off. I told Liv I'd be in late this morning." "Okay, I'll grab my notebook and laptop." Maggie returned a few seconds later with both items and sat beside him. He could hardly get a word in as she began to explore the possible routes, expounding on the pros and cons of each. She was so meticulous, and she had the best photo spots and attractions brought up within minutes, suggesting the places they could stop on their way to and from Broome, the seaside town where they'd honeymooned 3 years before. "But when we get there, we'll have to stay in the same hotel we did for our honeymoon." She lifted her gaze from her screen and met his. Unspoken words passed between them. Recalling those magical days and nights, their first as husband and wife brought a smile to his lips. With its long sandy beaches and laid-back lifestyle, Broome was the absolute best place for a honeymoon. But it was also a great place to camp. He made circles on her hand with his thumb. "Oh, I thought we could camp." Her eyes widened and disappointment flashed across her face until he chuckled. "I'm only kidding, my love. The hotel it is." Her face broke into a relieved smile as she swatted him gently on the arm. "Frank, you do like to tease, don't you?" He reached out and curled a loose tendril of hair around his finger before slipping his hand behind her head and drawing her face close to brush his lips across hers. "But I like this more." Laughing, she returned his kiss before pushing to her feet. "You'll be fired if you don't get to work soon." He grinned. "Bring it on." "You don't mean that, Frank." "No, but I'm looking forward to taking some time off." "So am I. It'll be wonderful." She wrapped her arms around his neck from behind and kissed his cheek. "Now, off you go." He squeezed her hands and angled his head to smile at her. "Come down later and we'll tell the family." "But we haven't decided anything definite yet." "We've decided where we're going. That's enough. And they'll need time to prepare for when we're gone." She nodded. "You're right. I'll pop down a little later and you can show me the rig as well." "You're going to love it." A grin grew on his face as he imagined her reaction when she saw the camper he'd been secretly working on for weeks. She chuckled and ruffled his hair. "I'm sure I will." After Frank left, Maggie tidied away the dishes and made another cup of tea. Her mind was a whirl. She needed a few quiet moments to process what had just happened. With Julian's passing and Joshua moving to Indigo Downs, she'd assumed the trip she and Frank had been talking about since their wedding would be put off indefinitely. While she was okay with that, because Goddard Downs was his life after all, it had also saddened her. Spending time together, just the two of them, exploring new places, was something she'd looked forward to. But she was wise enough to know that best-made plans often didn't happen. So Frank's announcement that he wanted to go anyway filled her with excitement and gratitude. She carried her tea to the deck, and after easing into her chair, she opened her Bible to do her morning reading. Although she was studying the book of Hebrews, she opened it at her favourite psalm, Psalm 100, and read it aloud, softly. "Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations." Like the psalmist, Maggie's heart overflowed with gratitude for the many blessings God had bestowed on her. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. "Lord, I give you thanks for your goodness, for bringing me to this place where I know beyond a shadow of a doubt you want me to be. but I also give you praise that Frank and I can spend quality time together while experiencing your amazing creation. Go before us and prepare the way for Goddard Downs to run without Frank. Bless the family and raise them up to be the people you want them to be. I pray these things in your Son's precious name. Amen. An hour later, she wandered down to the workshop. It was that time of year when the ground was beginning to cry out for rain, and she had to be careful where she walked, as deep ruts had started to appear in the track. Once the rains came and the dirt became soft and pliable, the boys would grade the tracks, levelling them out and making them easier to traverse, although she wasn't sure which she preferred. Dirt or mud, she chuckled. How her thoughts had changed in the 3 years she'd lived there. She loved city life, but there was something special about living on the land. God seemed closer somehow. She knew that wasn't the case, since God was everywhere, so she guessed the change was in her. She had more time to appreciate his goodness, to see his hand at work, and choosing to walk instead of driving the short distance gave her that extra time. Her heart was light by the time she reached the large workshop where all the vehicle maintenance was carried out. By necessity, Frank had learned to change an engine, fix a gearbox, and he could troubleshoot almost any mechanical fault a vehicle might have. Julian had never learned those skills. He'd preferred someone else look after that messy part of the business. Joshua had taken an interest, but preferred looking after the horses. Nate, Olivia's husband, being city-born and bred, was not mechanically inclined at all. And Sean, Frank's nephew, wasn't reliable enough. But David, Serena's husband, was a firefighter who didn't mind getting his hands dirty and was still trying to find his place at Goddard Downs. Frank had told Maggie that he hoped he might pass his knowledge on to David over time, but it was looking more and more likely they'd have to employ a mechanic from outside the family. And sooner than later, if she and Frank were to take this trip, another thing to hand over to God. She poked her head into the workshop and frowned. Frank didn't seem to be there. In fact, it was so quiet she could hear the ticking of the clock on the far wall. She took a breath and a swig of water and was turning to walk up to the main house when her gaze caught sight of the rig. Her eyes widened, and then she laughed. She'd assumed Frank had fixed the old caravan they'd bought not long after they married. But this wasn't the caravan. It was a camper that fitted onto the back of a small truck, much like a tortoise carrying its home with it wherever it went. She'd seen them on the road, of course. Tourists travelled through the Kimberley in the dry season sporting all sorts of rigs. And she'd always thought a camper like this would be fun. And now, as she stepped closer and studied it, she thought it was the perfect setup for her and Frank. It wasn't large by any means, but it would give them the best of both worlds. Indoor sleeping and outdoor living. And they wouldn't have to drag a van over those corrugated dirt roads. She was investigating the slide-out stove when footsteps sounded from behind. Turning, she came face to face with Frank. His eyes danced as he searched hers. "What do you think, my love?" "I think it's perfect." Smiling, she walked into his embrace and leaned against his strong chest. He kissed the top of her head. "I think so too. Let me show you inside." "Frank!" She chuckled at the suggestive tone of his voice. "I've already looked, and it's very cosy. I might even pass on the hotel, but right now, don't we have a family meeting to get to?" He released a heavy sigh. "Yes, we do." He slipped an arm around her shoulders. "So, you like it?" She looked into his eyes. "I love it. And I love that you want to do this trip. I can't wait to be travelling the open road with you." He rubbed her arm. "Well, we'd better go and break the news." "Yes, we should." They strolled the half-kilometre to the homestead, chatting about where they would head to first and what they'd need to take to last several weeks on the road before reaching any shops where they could restock. While joy bubbled through her, Maggie's mind whirled. There was so much to think about. How could they carry enough food to last 3 weeks? What about cooking utensils? And what clothes should they take?
It's all in hand, my love. I asked Janella to order extra supplies this month. We're ready to go as soon as we tell the family.
Oh, Frank, I can't believe you kept this from me. He chuckled.
I wanted it to be a surprise.
She laughed as she leaned into him. You definitely succeeded. The family was gathered in the main house. Everyone, including Joshua and Stella, was present, and it was a welcome sight to Frank's eyes. Although the couple now lived 4 hours' drive away, they'd agreed to attend the monthly family business meetings, and this was the first since their wedding.
Good morning,
Frank said brightly, looking at each face around the table. Maggie sat to his right, Serena and David were beside her, Olivia and Nate sat opposite. Joshua and Stella were at the other end, Sean sat beside Joshua, and Janella was to Frank's left. Sasha was minding the younger children, who were playing quietly in the adjoining room. His granddaughter possessed a natural maternal instinct that her cousins responded to. They were always happy to have her look after them.
First, I'd like to thank you all for being here, and a big welcome back to Joshua and Stella.
As he gave the newlyweds a nod, a wave of pride swept through him. The change in Joshua since Julian's death was nothing less than remarkable, and although they all missed Julian greatly, God had used his death to work in Joshua's life, changing him from a troubled young man who had little idea of what he wanted to a responsible, mature husband and leader.
We have a lot of business to cover this morning, but before we begin, let's start with a word of prayer.
They joined hands and bowed their heads as Frank committed their time to the Lord.
Dear Lord and Heavenly Father, thank you for Joshua's and Stella's safe return. We ask that you bless our time together and guide us as we make decisions that will affect us all. In your precious Son's name, Amen.
After taking a sip of tea, Frank turned to Joshua.
How are things in Indigo? Settling in okay?
Joshua crossed his arms.
Yes, but we need to find some hands before we get the new herd. We've put the word out but haven't advertised yet. We'd rather try for hands we've at least heard of before looking for new ones.
Frank nodded approvingly.
Good idea.
Less time training too, Stella chimed in. We want to get the new herd settled well before the next rainy season.
Indeed, Frank agreed. Speaking of which,
he squeezed Maggie's hand.
We have an announcement.
As expected, all eyes turned to him. What is it, Dad? Olivia folded her arms and studied him with narrowed eyes, her gaze darting between him and Maggie. He'd known that his daughter would have the most issue with them disappearing for a few weeks, so he replied to her.
Maggie and I have decided to take a trip.
Olivia frowned. Now? With everything that needs to be done? He nodded.
Yes. I've thought and prayed long and hard about this. Maggie and I need some time alone, and I'm sure you'll survive without us for a while.
Breaking his gaze with Olivia, he looked around the table, his gaze taking in each of the other family members in turn.
We'd love you all to work together to ensure everything runs smoothly while we're gone.
How long are you going for? Olivia barked.
We haven't fully decided, but perhaps a month. Once we have a better idea, we'll let you know. We just wanted to give you a heads up so we can start getting things ready to leave.
But we still have to find a vet to replace Stella and some new hands, she continued.
You're more than capable of handling all of that, Olivia.
He raised a brow and gave a pointed look. She huffed out a breath and shook her head, but remained silent. Usually, he would never have contemplated taking an extended trip with so many tasks outstanding, but things had changed. He cast his gaze around the table.
This will be a time for you all to step up, to learn some new skills, to work together. I have confidence in you all, and I know you'll be fine.
He placed his hands on the table.
That's all I have to share on my end, other than saying I expect to have an update from Mr. Tamala sometime soon. But Joshua and Stella will be handling that arrangement going forward, since the new herd will be under their supervision.
He didn't miss how his statement caused the corners of Joshua's lips to rise in a half grin, half smile. His son needed his space, an opportunity to shine not only as a man, but as a husband and as head of his own house. Frank was glad they'd finally come to a place where they could each be the men they were meant to be. It was long in coming. Julian would have been proud to see how his younger brother had stepped up already. That thought caused Frank's heart to feel heavy. It wasn't that long ago Julian was chairing these family meetings, eager to show himself as responsible. He never had anything to prove in Frank's eyes, but he didn't seem to understand that. Frank handed the floor to Joshua, who proceeded to explain the process they were undertaking to select the new herd. Stella added her points on the selection process and stated that she would be personally choosing the new cattle, especially the studs, whose breeding prowess would improve the herd's quality for years to come. Finally, once those matters were settled and everyone's questions answered, Frank opened the floor to any other business. "Does anyone else have anything to say?" "I do," David said quickly, sitting straighter and clearing his throat. Silence fell on the room before Frank nodded. "Good. The floor's yours. Over to you." "Thanks." David smiled as his gaze swept around the table. "Good morning to everyone. As newcomers, Serena and I don't have much to contribute normally, but there's a matter which I believe affects us all and is about to directly impact Serena." Leaning forward, Frank crossed his arms on the table and pinned David with his gaze. "Newcomers or not, you're family, and that gives you a right to speak." David gave an appreciative and a relieved smile. "Thank you." "So, what seems to be the trouble?" Frank asked. David released a heavy sigh. "It's the rains. We've only had one Christmas here, but in that time, we got to see how isolated Goddard Downs becomes during the wet season, and how dangerous it can be. Serena's program with the children is doing well, and this place is a sanctuary for them, but if they can't come during the rainy season because it's not safe to travel, everything she's been trying to do with them could be derailed. Months without being able to come could do more harm than good." "What do you have in mind?" Frank asked. "A bridge." Everyone's eyes widened, and an audible gasp rounded the table. David continued quickly. "I'm suggesting we build a bridge to provide safe passage to and from Goddard Downs, eliminating its isolation during the wet season. Having a bridge will also help in an emergency. And it would mean the children can come here safely all year round," Serena added. "They already experience so many disappointments, I don't want to add to them." Frank took a slow breath. He'd raised the idea of a bridge years before, when his father still held the reins. But the idea had been vetoed because of the cost. Now, however, the station was in a much better financial position. He glanced at Maggie. She'd been silently listening and met his gaze, hope filling her eyes. The project with the children had helped Serena overcome her own issues. And Maggie would welcome the idea of a bridge if it would help both her daughter and the children. He faced David and gave a nod. "I like the idea." "A bridge, Dad? Really?" Olivia protested, leaning forward. "Don't get me wrong, I'm all for anything that would make the station safer and enable Serena to carry on her program, but we're talking about building something that none of us have any idea how to do, nor of the costs involved. It could cost more than it's worth." She folded her arms and sat back in her chair with a stony expression on her face. Of course, Olivia would be negative. "We won't know that until we investigate," Frank replied, trying not to be too condescending. "How do the rest of you feel?" Janella spoke first. "I think it's a great suggestion. I've always thought something needed to be done. I think we all have at one point or another, but no one ever said anything." "It's because we're used to it," Frank said. "We've grown up with the rains and the flooding and we've just accepted that's the way it is. David and Serena haven't." He nodded at the pair. Sometimes new eyes are all that's needed to find a solution. "Sean, what do you think?" Blinking, his nephew straightened and ran his hand across his shaggy hair. I think it's about time. I could help." "How are you going to help with that broken arm?" Olivia asked almost derisively before turning her gaze to Frank. I think we should stick a pin in the entire thing until we have more information to base a decision on.
We aren't deciding now, Liv, Frank said, holding her gaze. But yes, we need information. David, can I entrust you to undertake some research? Certainly. I'll make a few calls and see what the process would be.
Olivia drew a long breath and blew it out. She sat forward in her chair. Okay, I'll get some quotes and see just how much this idea will cost, although I think it's going to be more than we can afford. We'd have to engage engineers and get the land surveyed, and then we'd have to find a construction company who could build it, plus pay for all the materials. And it wouldn't be a small bridge. Frank smiled. His daughter would do a thorough job of gathering details, even if she didn't support the idea.
Well, perhaps you and David can work together and report back at the next meeting. I'm thinking we should call an interim one before Maggie and I leave. 5 days to put everything together?
Olivia's eyes shot open. 5 days? That's not long enough.
Well, we need things to move quickly. I want to have this matter tabled or actioned before Maggie and I leave. A week from today should be enough time.
At least that's better than 5 days, Olivia said, rolling her eyes. Are we done?
I think so, unless anyone else has something they want to raise.
Frank waited a moment, and when no one responded, he called the meeting to an end. Maggie returned to the cottage to start planning their trip while Frank settled into his office for the day. He was pleased with how things had gone at the meeting, although there'd been little to debate other than the bridge. David's idea was a good one and worth investigating. If it proceeded, it would be another change, but one that Frank would welcome. He was more than used to the access issues the station experienced during the wet season, but having vehicular access all year round had to be beneficial. Chapter 2. Frank's 1-week edict to Olivia had sent her into overdrive. She'd taken over his office by mid-morning, the need to make calls in private the excuse, which meant he was forced out of the office for the rest of the day. Not that he minded, since he had plenty to do elsewhere. With no vet around, he was the one tending to the needs of the cattle. By mid-afternoon, with the sun beating down on him, he'd had enough. He leaned against his truck and took a slug of water. You all right there, Frank? David called out from where he was unwinding a reel of barbed wire.
I'm fine,
Frank said, straightening. Though he didn't feel fine, he didn't want a newcomer like David knowing, nor outdoing him. He pushed on, ignoring the tiredness and ache in his chest, but by the end of the day, he was struggling to keep his eyes open. He couldn't remember being so tired. He finished checking the mob of cattle in the high paddock and drove back to the homestead to grab some paperwork from the office before heading home. But the armchair on the veranda, with its soft cushions and footrest, called to him. Would it hurt to close his eyes for a few minutes? Succumbing, he eased into the chair, put his feet up, slipped his hat over his face, and closed his eyes. But guilt nibbled at him. How had he become so lazy that he needed a nap at this time of day? Had his time taking a back seat caused him to lose his edge? No, he couldn't accept that. He'd worked hard his entire life. He was used to it. A few months of late mornings couldn't possibly have made him so sluggish. Was it age? He considered himself in the prime of his life, despite the silver hair and 5 grandchildren under his belt. He didn't feel old. He wasn't old. Then what was the reason for this tiredness? Why did he feel 10 years older than he was? Are you all right, my love? Maggie's soft voice called from somewhere beyond the darkness behind his eyes.
Oh, perfectly. He pulled the hat from his face and smiled. Oh, I was just thinking.
About anything in particular? She asked as she walked over and slid onto his lap. He wrapped his arms around her waist as she snuggled close.
Oh, not really. How's the trip planning coming along? I'm guessing you've got the entire thing completely organised by now, he said, chuckling.
You know me too well, she chuckled with him. I've drawn up a plan, but it's at home. I thought we could go over it after dinner.
Sounds good. So, what brings you here?
I came to give Serena a hand. Oliver was fussing and she had an online meeting with the school district. Frank lifted his brow.
Everything all right there?
There were some questions about what she's planning to do when the rainy season comes. That's been one of their biggest concerns all along.
This morning's meeting was right on cue then. I'm very glad David made the suggestion.
I was surprised you warmed to it. All the years you've spent here and it never occurred to you to build a bridge. Then David arrives and immediately sees the need and is bold enough to speak up about it. That had to be confronting.
Oh, yes and no. I raised the idea many years ago when I was his age, but my father dismissed it because of the cost.
Maggie straightened. Really? I wasn't aware of that. He shrugged. Not many do. Well, I think this must be God's timing.
I wouldn't doubt it. A bridge could mean big changes for us, positive changes.
There've been so many already, even in the 3 years I've been here.
And here's another. I think I need to start exercising. I eat okay, but I think I may need to work out. Julian used to suggest it from time to time, but I never considered it seriously.
Don't you get enough exercise working on the station?
Oh, that's different. I'm not as young as I think I am. If I want to keep up around here after we come back from our trip, then I need to get fitter. I can't go running around mending fences and driving cattle if my body feels older than it is. I need to keep my strength up if I want to keep up with the boys.
Maggie chuckled. That's it. Having David here, young and strong, has you thinking about your strength all of a sudden.
Well, can't a man think of these things? He said with a laugh.
Maggie leaned closer, brushing her hand gently over his hair and gazing into his eyes. There's nothing wrong with your strength. There's no need for competition, but if you feel you need to exercise, then by all means do so. I'll join you.
Would you?
He'd expected Maggie to approve, but hadn't considered she'd want to join him. Why not? If you want to be healthier, then I should as well. We're in this together, after all. Frank's smile widened.
That we are.
He planted a kiss on her cheek.
Let's head home so we can make a start, and we can also look over the plans for the trip.
Music to my ears. Maggie replied, smiling. Let me say goodbye to Serena and then I'll meet you by the Jeep. She slipped off his lap and headed inside while he started towards the office to gather his things. Olivia was still in his chair but was so engrossed in her telephone conversation that she barely rose her hand in acknowledgement. She was so dedicated. Her entire life, she'd been the child he had to worry about the least. She was resolute and always in control, but she was also thoughtful and discerning. She'd made few mistakes in her life, but it meant she lacked the wisdom that experience and mistakes often brought. On the flip side, she'd been spared the pain of those lessons. He mouthed for her to enjoy the rest of her day before turning and heading to the door. The sooner he got home, the better he'd feel. A nice cup of tea and Maggie's company would soon dissipate all the aches and pains of the day. When he went outside, she was putting her bag into the back of the Jeep.
That was quick, he said.
Yes, Serena and Oliver were taking a nap, so I didn't bother them. He nodded and got into the driver's seat while Maggie climbed in the other side. Slipping his hand across the console, he took hers and looked into her eyes. The soft, tender expression he found there made him even happier he'd decided to take time out to spend with her. He kissed her knuckles gently. Let's go home. He put the key in the ignition, but before he could turn it, Janella appeared at the top of the veranda, waving her arm frantically in their direction before rushing down the steps. She was breathing heavily when she reached them. What is it, Janella? Maggie asked, leaning across the console. I got accepted to culinary school, she said between gasps.
That's wonderful! Congratulations!
Frank said. Following Julian's death, his daughter-in-law had buried herself in the kitchen and the children, emerging only because of Serena's youth program and the young man Jonah she'd met and helped. Frank was glad she'd finally found a pursuit outside of the station and the children, although this was another change that would affect everyone. Who would take over the cooking? Maggie beamed as she leaned across him. I knew you could do it, Janella. That's wonderful news. Thanks, but I don't know what to do. I only applied because Jonah asked me to. I wanted to support him and he refused to go ahead unless I did. I never imagined I'd be accepted. Her gaze lowered and she stared at her hands. I don't have time to go to school now. Frank frowned. Why not? She lifted her gaze, her dark eyes troubled. I'd have to leave the station. I can't do that, especially now. There's so much to get settled with everything that's happened in the past months. I can't take 2 years to go to Darwin just to follow some pipe dream I never had in the first place. What about Jonah? Was he accepted? Maggie asked. I have to call him and see if he's heard. I do hope so. He's so talented. He'll make a great chef someday. Maggie reached for Janella's hand. And so will you. Where do you think he got the inspiration? Who helped him improve his skills and put everything together for him to apply? That was all you, Janella. Don't discount yourself. You're more than capable, Janella, Frank added. You've been preparing gourmet meals for us for years. That's no easy feat. That's different, Frank. Everyone here is happy to eat whatever I cook. This is a school. People are going to criticise. It's their job. They'll soon realise I'm not that good. Rubbish, Maggie interrupted. You're a wonderful cook. Stop saying otherwise. I have to agree with Maggie, Janella. You'd make a wonderful chef. Plus, being in Darwin would mean you'd be close to Caleb. That has to be a positive. She smiled. Of course. I miss him so much. But there's a lot to consider. I can't just run off. It isn't only about me. Frank nodded. You have a point, but I'm sure the rest of the family would agree with us and tell you to grasp this opportunity with both hands. Please don't tell them, she said abruptly. I'd rather we kept this between us. Well, if that's what you want, Frank replied, although he wasn't sure why she'd want to keep it quiet. How long before you have to respond? Maggie asked. A week. Well, I for one hope you go, but it's your choice. We'll support you whatever you decide, Frank said, but I think we should pray about it. I will. I am, Janella said. That's great, but I'd like to pray for you now, if that's okay. Oh, yes, of course. Janella nodded, a grateful smile on her round face. Frank climbed out of the Jeep and Maggie followed suit, quickly running around to the driver's side, where they both placed their hands on Janella. They bowed their heads and Frank began. Father, you are the author and finisher of our faith. You knew us before you formed us in our mother's womb, and to each of us you have appointed a purpose on this earth. We may not know what your plans are, but you said in your word that if we seek, we shall find. If we knock, it shall be opened to us, and if we ask, we shall receive. Father, we come seeking your will for Janella. She's been a faithful servant, Lord. She's raised her children in the love and fear of you. She stood by Julian's side and supported him, and today she's seeking guidance for her future. We ask that you bless her and give her peace. May your hand be upon her. She never means ill for anyone, Lord. She always wants the best for those around her, but now let her see that you may have a new purpose for her life and let her be open to that. We ask these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Amen. Maggie and Janella both echoed softly. Thank you, Frank, Janella said, the smile on her face even broader and more genuine than before. Oh, don't thank me. I was just doing what I felt we should. It's always best to bring God into the middle of such decisions. Janella nodded. Very true. I'll let you two go now. I realise you were heading home. It was no trouble, Frank replied. We're always here for you, Janella, you know that. I know. Thank you. Smiling, she stepped up and gave him a kiss on the cheek. I look forward to hearing what you decide, Maggie said, giving her a hug. I'll be sure to tell you once I know. Great. Maggie smiled and walked around to the other side of the Jeep. Janella stepped back and waited while Frank climbed in. He turned the key and raised a hand before pulling away. As she waved back, he couldn't help but think this was another pivotal moment in their lives. "I'm so glad she got accepted," Maggie said as they drove down the track towards the cottage. "It'll be good for her." Frank nodded. "Oh, I agree. I only hope she takes it up." "You don't think she will?" "I don't know," he shrugged. "Life in the city would be very different for her. But it's in God's hands, and we have to trust that she'll listen." "Agreed. He knows best." She placed her hand on his thigh as the Jeep bumped along the rutted track beneath the setting sun. The long day was behind them, and he looked forward to a relaxing evening with his wife. Getting fit could wait another day. Chapter 3. Janella's news was the perfect end to Maggie's day. Frank's suggestion that their trip should be sooner rather than later, followed by the afternoon spent with little Oliver, and now learning that Janella had been accepted into culinary school had been the icing on the cake. The day couldn't have been more wonderful. Once they reached the cottage, she set about preparing for dinner. Frank would be hungry, and although family dinners at the main house had resumed, they still liked their private dinners at least 3 times a week. Today was one of those days. While he went to shower, she pulled the lasagna she'd made the previous day from the fridge and cut 2 large squares, placing them side by side on a baking sheet before popping them into the oven. The pieces had only to be warmed, and their new oven only needed a few minutes to get to the right temperature. By the time he joined her, the table was laid with sparkling water, a tossed green salad, lasagna, and some crusty bread. "Bon appetit," she chuckled as she presented her table. "Lovely." He stepped towards her, kissing her on the forehead before pulling a chair out for her. She loved his gentlemanly ways. It was so refreshing. They talked a great deal as they ate, about the small things, their day, the beautiful sunset they witnessed on the way home, and plans to spend some time on the deck watching the water after dinner. Finally, the topic turned to their trip. "So, show me what you've come up with," Frank said as he wiped his mouth with a napkin. He'd refused the leftover apple cobbler she'd offered, but she indulged herself with a slice, along with some whipped cream. He was already taking his new fitness plan seriously. She'd start tomorrow. She rose from the table and collected her notebook and laptop from the kitchen counter where she'd left them. She'd spent several hours after the meeting ended researching where to go and where to stay. The camper had solar panels, and Frank had told her they'd also take a generator. So they didn't need to stick to a tight schedule and could basically go wherever they fancied, but that went against her grain. She liked to plan and know where she was going, although when she was younger and still married to Cliff, she'd entertained the idea of caravanning across the country and going wherever the wind took them, but it never happened. Her ex-husband didn't want to miss any important political opportunities, and the idea of sleeping in a caravan instead of a hotel didn't appeal to him. Now he was living in a small room, unable to go out, and receiving medication to treat his psychotic disorder. She couldn't help but feel a moment of sadness for him. After all he'd done, and everything he'd strived for, he now had nothing. Mandy, his second wife, had remarried, and he never saw their daughter. Serena and Jeremy visited on occasion, but not often, since he'd made it clear he didn't want them to come to the secure hospital to see him. She could understand that. It would be humiliating for him. Maybe one day he'd get better and be released and regain some semblance of a normal life, but in the meantime, all they could do was pray for him. "Maggie?" She blinked. "Sorry, my mind wandered a little," she confessed with a chuckle. "Let me show you the route I thought might work." Frank leaned closer to look at the laptop screen. From here to Broome is about a 7-hour drive, but there are lots of places to stop along the way, as you know. I'm thinking we should go up to Mitchell Falls for one. It would take 3 days to get there and back, but we should only go if you think the truck would make it. The track's rough, and it's not recommended for trailers. "The truck will be fine. I've always wanted to see the falls, so that's a great idea."
After that, Derby and then Broome.
But I'd also love to see Cape Leveque. But then, do you think we could head south and see the wildflowers? And I'd love to go to the Kirigini National Park and Monkey Mia to swim with the dolphins. And then there's the Pinnacles and Perth and Albany.
Frank chuckled. How long are you thinking we'll be gone?
She shrugged. I don't know. How long can we travel?
To do all of that would take at least a month, but we'd be driving non-stop. To take it slowly and enjoy the sights, I think we'd need 3 months.
Can we be away that long?
I don't see why not.
His eyes twinkled as a grin grew on his face.
I think it might do the family good to survive that long without us.
She smiled broadly. I love the sound of that. 3 months with you, camping out, sounds wonderful.
I totally agree. But will Serena be able to cope without you?
A small breath escaped Maggie. That was her major concern. But Serena was resourceful, and Oliver was a good baby. They'll be fine.
Good. So, 3 months it is. And if we leave in 10 days' time, Olivia and David should have the information on the bridge before then.
I'll start packing. But first, I better do the dishes. She stood and started clearing the table.
No, I'll do that, Frank said, taking the plates from her hands. You cooked. I'll do the dishes.
Okay, thank you. I'll make some tea to have on the deck.
Sounds wonderful. I'd like some of that chamomile,
he said while collecting the salad bowl and placing it on top of the plates before walking to the sink. Maggie filled the kettle, turned it on, and while waiting for it to boil, grabbed the mugs and the tea bags. Frank made quick work of the dishes, which she ended up wiping, and once they were done, he carried the tray containing their tea out to the deck. He set the tray on the small table between their chairs, and as she sat, she gazed up at the sky. It was filled with a sea of stars, all twinkling like diamonds. She sighed. I'll never get tired of looking up.
I agree. It's amazing.
He reached over and took her hand and gently stroked her skin with his thumb. She exhaled a long sigh of contentment. She was so blessed. Frank was rougher than Cliff in many ways, and yet he was far more tender and loving. He was the kind of man movies were made about, the rancher on his horse, spending his days herding livestock, living life with passion. Dependable, strong, trustworthy. If ever there was a depiction of a perfect husband, it was Frank. At least, in her mind. She turned and faced him. I feel so blessed to be married to you, Frank. His forehead creased and a bemused grin filled his face.
How'd you get to that from gazing at the stars?
She chuckled, shrugged. I don't know. Their gazes held for a long moment before he said, Come here. He rose to his feet and gently pulled her up to meet him. She stepped into his arms as he wrapped them around her, holding her close but tenderly. His lips pressed against her forehead as they swayed to imaginary music. Not only was he a great horseman, father and rancher, he was also a terrific dancer. She breathed deeply, clearing her mind as she nestled against his chest, searching for the sound of his beating heart. After some time, her thoughts turned to the bridge. Do you think the bridge will get built before the rains come if the price is right? He chuckled.
How can the bridge be on your mind? I thought you'd only have thoughts of me.
He pulled back and grinned. She chuckled with him. I'm sorry. I just thought of it.
It's okay.
They resumed dancing.
With David and Olivia on it, I don't doubt it could get done. They're both very capable people, and from what I've seen, David's not afraid of hard work and challenge.
He certainly faced many challenges as a fireman, and even more winning Serena's heart. I'm so glad they're here with us now. I feel that the family and the station are becoming stronger.
You're right, my love. This family has faced many trials in the past few years, but God has brought us through every one of them and made us stronger because of them. I'm sure he gave David the idea for the bridge. I'm sensing it's come at the right time.
Maggie nodded.
From the very beginning, when I look back and see the tapestry the Lord has woven to get me from one stage of my life to another, I can't help but smile. I can see it all in hindsight, how each step I took and each mistake I made brought me closer and closer to you and the life we have now. I never thought I'd get divorced, and once I had, I never imagined remarrying, but God saw it all. He led me here. She lifted her chin and gazed into her husband's eyes. To you. Frank's smile was brilliant, even in the dim light. He lowered his lips to hers and kissed her deeply. She breathed in the scent of the oatmeal soap on his skin. She loved him so much. She loved their life together. She couldn't imagine it without him now. In all the years she had with Cliff, she could never have imagined loving like this, feeling this way, or having such a life. She felt freer now than she ever had. Her eyes stung as the kiss deepened. "Maggie, what is it?" Frank asked as they parted. "Nothing," she replied, wiping her eyes. "You're crying," he said gently. He rubbed her back soothingly as he hugged her. "You can tell me." She laughed and sniffled simultaneously. "I'm being silly, that's all." "No, you're never silly." "I'm just so happy," she confessed. "I'm so very happy." He hugged her tighter. "I'm glad. I'd hate to be the only one feeling that way." They both laughed and continued their musicless dance. This trip couldn't come soon enough. Chapter 4. Janella sat quietly on the edge of her bed in the semi-dark as the laugh of a kookaburra ushered in the dawn. Sasha lay asleep on the other side. It had been a long time since her daughter had crawled in bed with her. Julian had never encouraged the children to join them, as he always felt their marital bed was a special place just for them. It was only on the odd occasion when one of the children was sick that he allowed them to snuggle down between them. However, it wasn't illness that brought Sasha to her bed sometime during the night, but comfort. More than ever, they needed each other. There was so much change going on at Goddard Downs. Janella sometimes wondered what Julian would say if he were there to see it. Would he be proud? Hopeful? Skeptical? Joshua's new marriage, Caleb's departure for school, the acquisition of Indigo Downs, and now the talk of a bridge, and her acceptance to culinary school. It all seemed too much, but it was all happening. But one question remained. Was she ready? Slipping to her knees, she closed her eyes and clasped her hands. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Jesus' name, Amen. Taking a deep breath, she rose to her feet, stretching her arms above her head before leaning to one side and then the other. The day wouldn't wait for her to answer that question. There was a lot to do, and she was the one to do it. If breakfast for the family and station hands was to be ready on time, she needed to get moving. Her lingering doubts could wait or join her as she carried out her tasks. Either way, she had no time to waste. She showered quickly, the cold water jolting all traces of sleep, before dressing in jeans and a navy blue button-down blouse with a tank top underneath. She paused to look at her reflection in the mirror. Her youthful hourglass was gone, and she looked more like the vase on her dressing table, with more bulge in the middle than anywhere else. She hadn't noticed the pounds piling on since Julian's passing. She'd never been a small woman, but before, her curves were more appealing. She took a deep breath and released it slowly. At least her clothes still fit. Just. She turned and left the room. Sasha would find her way to the kitchen when she woke, so there was no need to rouse her. The kitchen was quiet as Janella began her usual prep. The stillness allowed her mind to wander. She envisioned herself walking the streets of Darwin amidst the hustle and bustle of crowds and traffic. The thought made her shake her head. It was ridiculous. She wasn't a city dweller. There was no way she could be happy there. Mornings filled with honking horns instead of the sound of kookaburras and willy wagtails. No, it wasn't for her. How could she live in a crowded apartment complex after living here, where their nearest neighbour was 3 hours away? But she couldn't help thinking of Caleb and Julian at the same time. She missed her son so much, and she was sure that Julian would encourage her to go if he could. He'd always wanted her to stretch her wings, and she'd always resisted. Julian would say she'd never know if she liked it until she did. But he wasn't here to tell her that. She clenched her jaw at the cruel reality. Julian wasn't going to return. She wouldn't see him again until the day she joined him in heaven. All she had left of him were memories, photos in frames, and their children. Tears built behind her eyes. But no, she wouldn't cry. This once, she'd stay strong. It still hadn't sunk in fully that he was gone, even though it had been almost a year. It still hurt. Sometimes she forgot and woke up expecting to find him in the office or getting coffee in the kitchen to start his day. He'd be so proud of how well Caleb was doing, and Sasha too. Their daughter was maturing before her eyes. Janella couldn't get her out of the kitchen or her own wardrobe, though Sasha only ever borrowed clothes that were old and didn't fit Janella anymore. She sighed. What am I to do about all of this, God? I don't know what to do. Sniffing, she steeled herself and continued to crack eggs into a bowl for the French toast she was making. Half an hour later, Sasha joined her in the kitchen. Janella smiled. Good morning, sweetheart. Good morning, Mum, Sasha replied, wrapping an apron around her waist and stepping to the counter. What do you need me to do? You can get the sausages and start on those, Janella replied, flipping the toast over in the pan, the scent of cinnamon wafting up to meet her. Okay, Sasha replied cheerfully. Janella glanced over her shoulder. Sasha wore a smile as she retrieved the sausages from the fridge and grabbed a frying pan to cook them in. She was so happy working in the kitchen, and Janella was so pleased to have her there. Since Caleb left for school, Sasha made more time for her. It was as if she knew Janella needed her close. But one day her daughter, like Caleb, would leave for boarding school and she'd be left alone. Her heart sank. One day, she would be alone. Sash, are you looking forward to going off to school and joining Caleb one day? She asked offhandedly. She truly didn't know how her daughter felt about it. It was a couple of years away, but still. You know I love it here, Mum, but I miss Caleb. Plus, his school looks so cool, I can't wait to go. Janella blinked rapidly to push back the sudden stinging in her eyes. The words came out of her mouth without thought. If I went with you, would you like that? Are you thinking of moving to Darwin when I go to school? Sasha asked, her eyes widening. Janella paused, mouth open but words absent. The news of her acceptance was on the tip of her tongue, but try as she might, she couldn't utter them. It was as if her tongue was tied. Mum? Sasha repeated when she didn't answer immediately. Janella forced a smile. No, of course not. I was just asking. Sasha looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe you should think about it. I'd love to have you there. Then you, Caleb, and I can be together. Janella stopped to look at her daughter. But don't you think I'd be out of place in the city? Sasha continued to unwrap the sausages as the pan heated up. Why would you be out of place? Look at me, Janella said. I'm not exactly a city woman. I'm not fashionable at all. You don't do too badly, Mum. Yes, your clothes are a little old, but they're nice enough. But other than those couple of short visits with Caleb, I've never spent any time in Darwin. I wouldn't know where to start if I lived there. Sasha dropped the sausages into the pan. They sizzled immediately. Neither did Dad or Caleb when they first went, but they did just fine.
And don't you always tell me that I'll be fine when it's my time to go? If you think I'll do well, then why wouldn't you? Janella didn't have a response. She always encouraged her children, but when it came to herself, it wasn't so easy. She returned to the French toast and kept her news to herself. Later that evening, Janella found a quiet seat on the veranda and called Jonah. She'd tried to reach him the day before, but he hadn't answered. Surely, if he'd been accepted, he would have been eager to let her know. That made her wonder if he hadn't been, and that seemed unfair. If she could give him her place, she gladly would. She was about to hang up when he answered. "Hello?" "Jonah, it's Janella." "Janella, hi, how are you?" "I'm good." "Me too," he said excitedly. "I got accepted. My letter came this afternoon. Can you believe it? I'm going to culinary school." Her chest swelled with pride. Jonah had made it. "I knew you could do it," she said. "I never had a doubt." "I did," he admitted. "If it wasn't for you, I would never have thought of applying. My dad wants to thank you. He's doing well these days. No drinking or any of that anymore. We're spending time together. Again, that's all because of you." Janella shook her head. "It wasn't me. I just did what was right. If it was anyone, it was God. If it was God, then I thank him. I never thought I'd see Dad get up each morning to go to work. I thought I'd be looking after him forever. Then I met you and everything changed." Tears of joy welled in her eyes. She'd never made such an impression on anyone's life before, not even her children's, at least not in her mind. She'd always taken the back seat since Julian had been such a powerful figure. "I just helped you see what was in you all along." "What about you?" Jonah asked. "Did you get accepted?" She paused. If she told him, would there be any going back? Would that be her decision made? But how could she not tell him? She couldn't lie. She hesitated, then answered in an almost subdued voice. "Yes, I got accepted." "That's great! We'll be at school together. You can help me, and you'll get to be near your son," he said excitedly. "This is going to be so cool." She gulped. How could she tell him that she hadn't decided whether she'd be going or not? How could she destroy his enthusiasm? She couldn't. "I'm sure it will be," she said. "I have to formally accept the offer, but my dad thinks I should go there first to see if I like it. Would you come with me?" he asked. "You've been to Darwin before. I've never been there. Neither has my dad." Her lips parted. If she went to Darwin with Jonah, might it help her decide as well? See if she could fit in. But could she leave the station to find out? Maggie and Frank were leaving on their trips soon, but the school needed an answer in a week, the amount of time Frank had given to investigate the bridge construction. Could they spare her for a few days? "Janella?" "Yes, sorry, Jonah. Of course I can go with you." "Great. I'll tell Dad. I'm so excited. I never thought I could do anything like this. I didn't think I was smart enough or good enough." Janella shared his sentiments. "You need to have more faith in yourself and allow God to lead you." The words struck her as she uttered them. She should be taking her own advice. "Is your dad there now?" she asked. "No, he had a late shift at work today." "Okay, I'll call him in the morning and make arrangements for the trip." "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." Janella smiled. "I'm sure you'd survive. Have a great night, Jonah." "You too." Ending the call, she stared out into the darkness, her heart pounding. Darwin. She was going to Darwin. With Jonah. It didn't mean she would accept the offer, but it was a step closer. She had to tell Frank and Maggie. She went to call Maggie's number, but then hesitated, only to press it before she changed her mind. Maggie answered almost immediately. Janella swallowed hard and cleared her throat. "Jonah got accepted to culinary school, but his dad wants him to go to Darwin to check it out before he accepts the offer. His dad can't go with him, so he asked me if I'd go. I told him I would, but I want to make sure I can be spared for a few days."
She was talking fast, but she had to get it out before she lost courage. "That's wonderful, Janella. And if you go, I'm sure it'll help you decide whether to accept too." Maggie's voice was filled with joy. "Let me get Frank." Janella held the line for only a few moments before Frank joined Maggie on the other end. "Of course, you should go, Janella," he said. "How long do you think you'll be away?" "A few days at least. I have to let them know in 6 days' time, but I should know in less than that." "I think it's wonderful you're going," Maggie chimed in. "I'm sure you'll see that this is what God wants for you." Maggie sounded so sure, but Janella still had doubts. "I guess we'll see. I don't want to keep you much longer. You must be trying to relax and enjoy some time together. I'll go now." "We can talk in the morning," Maggie said. "If you want any help making arrangements, just let me know. I'd be happy to help." Janella smiled. "Thanks, Maggie. You're a wonderful friend." "We want the best for you, Janella," Frank said, "no matter what that is. If going to Darwin will help make the choice clearer for you, I think that's great." "You need to be open to this being the path God has for you," Maggie added. "I know." Janella drew a deep breath. That God might have something like this planned for her was beyond amazing. But still, her heart beat like a drum just thinking about it. "Good night," Maggie and Frank said together. "Good night," she replied. The tiniest of smiles crept onto her face. Could this truly be what God wanted for her? Chapter 5. Frank sipped his tea as the family gathered around the table for their meeting. A week had flown by quickly, and in that time he'd gotten a lot done. The camper was almost ready for their trip. He'd gone over the truck's mechanicals to ensure it was in tip-top condition. The last thing he wanted was to break down in the middle of nowhere. He wanted everything perfect for their trip of a lifetime. He leaned to his right and whispered into Maggie's ear. "Where are David and Serena?" "I'm not sure. They knew the meeting was this morning. I reminded her yesterday." Frank drummed his fingers on his leg. David's attendance was essential to the meeting. He was to report his investigations into the bridge construction. There'd be little point in having it if he failed to show. "Maybe you should check on them." Maggie nodded, but had only gotten to her feet when both David and Serena, with little Oliver in her arms, rushed into the room. "Sorry we're late," David apologised. "The little guy gave us a difficult time last night." Frank chuckled, relief flowing through him. "We've all been there, son. Take a seat. I think we can start now." He set his cup of tea aside and bowed his head to pray. "Father, we thank you that you've allowed us to gather together once more in your name to discuss the matters of this station. Lord, we know that we can make plans, but it is only by your grace and mercy that we accomplish them. We commit our endeavours to you. In Jesus' name, Amen." He cleared his throat. "Before we go into the matter of the bridge, I want to address Janella's absence. As you know, Janella left for Darwin to visit Caleb for a few days. She's also accompanying Jonah, the youth from Serena's program, who got accepted into culinary school." He shifted his gaze to Serena, who was sitting at the end of the table rocking Oliver in her arms. "I want to offer my congratulations, Serena. I'm sure this is only the first of many successes your program will have in the lives of children in this area, and I dare say further afield. You're doing a great job with them." A small round of applause erupted, and Serena smiled. "Oh, thanks, Frank. Not only for your kind words, but for allowing us to host this aspect of the program here. I couldn't have enjoyed this success without your support. Everyone's support." Her gaze swept around the table but settled on Maggie. The smile on his wife's face reflected her immense pride in Serena's progress since her unfortunate accident. It didn't seem that long ago she was afraid to step out and be seen in public because of her scarring after being involved in a bomb attack in Paris when she was a journalist. But now, she stood in front of rooms filled with teenagers and young adults, speaking to them about self-esteem, achieving their goals, and perseverance in the face of challenge. The change was remarkable, wrought by God's gentle hand on her life.
Frank shared Maggie's joy in Serena's success and hoped she would have many more. He wished he could have shared Janella's good news as well, but his daughter-in-law had made it clear before she left that she still didn't want anyone to know about her acceptance into the culinary school until she'd made a decision. Still, her absence had to be explained. Now, Olivia and David, what information did you get concerning the building costs? His daughter straightened and opened the manila folder sitting on the table in front of her. You didn't give us a lot of time, Dad, but I was able to get some gross estimates for what the construction would cost. I had to keep my list of options small, so I only got 10 to compare. Frank chuckled under his breath. Only 10. Olivia looked up at him, oblivious to his amusement. Yes, I would have gotten more to be completely thorough, but I figured 10 would have to do. Of course, Frank agreed, bemused. You don't leave anything to chance, do you, Liv? Joshua added with a laugh. Olivia looked at him pointedly. I don't. Especially as substantial a project as this one. The wrong move could cost the station millions. Her statement was a sobering remark that ended the laughter immediately. There was a reason she was the one responsible for the management of the station's finances. Frank thanked God silently. And there couldn't be a better person. Olivia continued explaining the quotes she'd gotten, weighing in on the pros and cons of each. Finally, she summarised the project. I believe it's too expensive. The construction companies require far too much to build the structure, and that doesn't include the costs for land surveying, the design and building materials, nor if we run into any problems. However, I did ask that the companies give me their best prices based on the simplest design and the shortest amount of building time. She passed copies of the documents around for everyone to look at. Frank took a copy and scrutinised it. Olivia had left nothing out. There were estimates for everything. If I may? Frank looked up to find David with his hand raised. Yes, David? Olivia has done an amazing job gathering this information, but I also got some figures from a few friends in Darwin. I think you'll find that the job can be done a lot cheaper, especially if we all pitch in to cut down the cost of the labour. Olivia narrowed her eyes. How could your numbers be lower than mine? I called in some favours. There were some guys I met a few years ago. Their construction company was nearly lost during a fire, but we were able to save it. They said if I ever needed help, they'd be happy to assist. I contacted the main guy and he sent these figures to me. You can all have a look. I didn't copy enough for everyone, so you'll have to pass the sheet around. Olivia's hand shot out first. She wouldn't believe anyone could outdo her unless she saw it for herself. Everyone was silent as she studied the numbers. Slowly, her expression softened. He agreed to this price? He did, David confirmed. He also called in favours from some of his associates and got us reduced prices for design and surveying. And all within the timeframe we're looking at. Also, I asked some former fireman buddies of mine who have construction experience to pitch in. It'll save us even more on labour. We can help, Sean and Nate said simultaneously. They chuckled at their synchronicity. You go first, Nate offered, leaning back to wrap an arm around his wife's shoulders. I said before that I could help, Sean said. I've always thought a bridge would make sense, so I'd like to be a part of the project. Your arm isn't even healed yet, Olivia challenged. And what about the drives? We can't allow them to slip because you've all divided your time between them and building a bridge. We'll manage, Nate assured. Sean's arm will be right as rain soon, and then he can do anything that needs to be done. Frank stifled a laugh as Olivia shot her husband a pointed look. Nate would pay for supporting Sean later, he was sure. I don't see dividing their time as a problem, Frank said. I think Nate, Sean and David know what they can handle. Am I right? Yes, they each replied in turn. Frank held out his hand and Olivia passed the paper. He glanced over the numbers, which were far less jarring than those she'd presented. This is good, David. Very good. He looked up. Did they give any idea when they could start if we decide to proceed? David nodded. They're just waiting for my call. The surveyors can be here within a couple of days,
and then we'll have to meet with the designer after that. Dad and Maggie are leaving in a couple of days, and I'm sure Dad will want to have some input. Am I right, Dad? Olivia asked. Yes, Frank confirmed, nodding. David was unfazed. I figured as much, which is why I arranged for a virtual meeting. Frank can sit in from wherever he is as long as he has an internet connection. You thought of everything, Olivia commented, turning in David's direction. Despite her initial reservations, she sounded impressed. I was raised by a very organised aunt who made sure that whatever we did it well, he said with a grin. A very wise woman, Olivia noted. Frank thanked God that Olivia seemed to be on board, and it warmed his heart to witness the exchange between the younger generation. They'd need to work together while he and Maggie were gone for 3 months. They all would. Speaking of which, he had to inform them of the final plan for their trip, but not until after the vote on the bridge. He passed the paper David provided to Maggie to review. Soon, the paper made its way around the entire table and back to David. If everyone's had a chance to look over the numbers, why don't we take a vote? He said. All in favour of the bridge? Raise your hand. One by one, everyone raised their hand, although Olivia was still a little hesitant. Frank was sure that she was still concerned about the costs, but the figures David presented made it possible, and no one could argue the fact that it would be an invaluable feature for the station to have. It's unanimous. We're building a bridge, Frank declared. David, call your friend and let him know that we want to get started as soon as possible. Have him send official estimates to Liv so she can make arrangements to meet with the bank about a loan. He turned to his daughter. Let me know if you need anything from me before we leave. How long are you going to be gone? Olivia asked, leaning forward. Frank exchanged a smile with Maggie as he reached under the table and squeezed her hand. We've decided that we want to take our time and enjoy this trip, so we'll be gone at least 3 months. Olivia's voice was piercing when she responded. 3 months, Dad? Are you sure? Of course he is, Liv, Joshua piped up. Stop worrying so much. We can handle everything here. His son had remained quiet for the entire meeting, whispering to Stella from time to time, but now he spoke up. Dad knows we can handle it, otherwise he wouldn't be going. Isn't that right, Dad? Absolutely, Frank confirmed. I trust you all to work together to see this project to completion and to ensure that everything runs smoothly on the station while we're gone. Joshua, you need to stay on top of the Tamala situation. I won't be completely out of touch during this trip, but I won't be checking in that frequently either. You don't have to worry, Dad. I've got it under control. The confidence in Joshua's voice made Frank smile. Indeed, his son had come into his own. Thank you, everyone, for your input today. I think we've covered everything we need to. Maggie will provide you with a map of our planned route so that you'll know where we are. The camp is ready, and all we need to do now is some last-minute packing. I'm sure you'll have an amazing time. Stella leaned forward, smiling. Perhaps Joshua and I will get to do something like that in the future. She turned and grinned at her husband. Camping out under the stars sounds wonderful. Joshua chuckled. I do enough sleeping under the stars on the cattle drives. I don't think I need that on a holiday too. Stella pouted and Joshua leaned in to kiss her cheek. But for you, I'd do it. Frank smiled. Wise man, Joshua. A happy wife makes for a happy life. You got that right, Nate agreed, and everyone laughed. I think we can call this meeting adjourned, Frank said, pushing away from the table. What I wouldn't give for some of Janella's treats about now, Sean commented. I know what you mean. She makes the most amazing food, Nate said. The urge to tell them the news was on the tip of his tongue, but Frank held it in. He respected Janella and would honour her wish to keep her news quiet for the time being. He wondered how she was doing in Darwin. He'd call her before they left, but in the meantime, he had a trip to finish getting ready for. He kissed Maggie on the cheek and told her he had to tidy a few things in the office, but he'd be right back. She was chatting with Serena, but she looked up and they shared a smile that spoke volumes. They couldn't wait to leave. Only one more night. Frank excused himself and headed to the office. As he sat at the desk, he took a moment to study the photos filling the walls. A lifetime of memories. But he was sure many more would be added to the collection. A graduation photo of Janella, perhaps. He bowed his head and prayed, "Lord, whatever Janella decides, let your will prevail."
Chapter 6. Why did it have to itch right up to the elbow? Sean shoved the ruler as far up the space between his arm and the cast as he could and moved it around vigorously. He closed his eyes and groaned with satisfaction as it finally hit the spot. He was tired of the cast. Each day when he woke, he longed to see it gone, but the doctor said he still needed another couple of weeks. It had been a bad break he'd gotten from coming off a bull at a rodeo, and it was taking longer than expected to heal. "You look busy," Joshua commented as he strolled into the kitchen and poured himself an orange juice. He didn't live there anymore, but he still had free rein to come and go as he pleased, and today they'd all gathered to see Uncle Frank and Maggie off on their 3-month holiday. "You may not think it, but this is work. Do you know how difficult it is to get to the right spot?" Sean asked, biting his bottom lip as he scratched harder. It was utterly satisfying. Joshua gulped down his juice. "I know what you mean. I broke my arm when we were kids, remember?" Sean nodded as he recalled that summer when Joshua wound up in a cast for 8 weeks. They'd been climbing giant boabs when he fell and landed on a rock. With their enormous trunks, the giant boabs were difficult to climb, but that one had split up the middle, causing the tree to branch off in 2 directions. They thought they could shimmy up the middle and reach the boughs. They were wrong, and Joshua paid the price. "How could I forget? Olivia scolded me for days, saying it was me who encouraged you to climb that tree." Joshua chuckled. She refused to listen to explanations. She was so sure she knew what had happened. "But I wasn't the ringleader that time. You were," Sean replied. "Yeah, but who'd believe that?" Joshua laughed as he finished his juice. "True. When there was mischief to be had, I was usually the one leading the charge," Sean admitted. "We had some good times." Joshua met his gaze and nodded. Did his cousin feel the same sense of loss that he did? It made him sad to recall their abandoned past. The closeness they'd shared when they were younger was gone, but Sean no longer saw that as a bad thing. He'd always gotten Joshua into scrapes, and though his cousin had been a willing participant, he'd come to realise that the real reason Joshua followed him into one half-cocked idea after another was to ensure that Sean came out all right. Joshua had his back. But now, with Stella in the picture, Joshua had left all that behind. He'd grown up and was finally gaining respect from the family. Even Uncle Frank appeared to treat him with more consideration than ever before. "At least we have our memories," Sean added before the mood took a nosedive. "We do," Joshua said with a smile. He walked to the sink and rinsed out the glass. "I have to stop by the office to check on some things with Liv before Dad and Maggie ship out. Meet you out front?" "Sure," Sean replied, placing the ruler on the table in front of him. The itch was all scratched out, at least for now. Joshua left, but he remained at the table. His cousin was happy, and he was happy for him. But it didn't change the fact that he missed him. What would it be like at Goddard Downs with both him and Uncle Frank gone? Sean lived under no pretences. If it hadn't been for his uncle spearheading his return, he doubted very much that he would have been welcomed back again after the way he'd behaved. Not that he would have blamed everyone. He'd made a fool of himself, acting like a petulant child because Joshua wanted to grow up. It had taken him a long time to realise that, and he was trying daily to make up for it. But as far as he could tell, he wasn't making much headway. His arm made him feel useless for the most part. Every day when the others headed to work, he felt like a giant toadstool just sitting there, eating and drinking and doing nothing to earn his keep. No one said anything, but it was the way he felt. He got up from the table and took the ruler with him. He never knew when another itch would hit, and it was best to be prepared. The rest of the family was gathered in a small group around Uncle Frank and Maggie's rig, inspecting it. Gadding about in a rig like this was the sort of thing his uncle would like, But Sean was surprised that Maggie seemed enthusiastic about their trip and their plans to rough it. She didn't seem like that kind of person. Sean didn't know why, but he had her pegged as a woman who'd prefer hotel rooms and bubble baths to a basic camper on the back of a truck. But that showed how little he knew her. He hadn't tried to get to know her, and it was one of many things he had to correct. "The rig looks great, Uncle Frank," Sean said. His uncle and Maggie had just finished chatting with one of the hands who'd walked off after tipping his hat. Uncle Frank turned in his direction and smiled, his face brightening. "Thanks, Sean. She's a beauty, isn't she?" "Better than that," Maggie agreed, stepping closer to Uncle Frank. "She's perfect." He slipped his arm around her waist and kissed the top of her head. Sean smiled awkwardly and averted his gaze. Witnessing the affection between the pair made him feel strange, as if he were intruding on something private. "I'm sure you'll have many adventures out there on the road," he continued, forcing himself to look at his uncle. "I'm sure we will. We've not done anything like this before, and we're looking forward to it, aren't we, love?" He squeezed Maggie closer. "Absolutely," she replied, smiling up at him with such a look of love it made him squeamish. The others joined them. Nate's arm was draped around Olivia. Joshua stood with Stella, his arm also around his wife. David and Serena stood together, a little family with their baby, while William and Isabel hovered around Sasha. Sean was the only person on his own. Years of chasing skirts and the next good thing, and what had it gotten him? Back at Goddard Downs, feeling like the odd man out, that's what. A pang of longing rose inside him as he looked at the couples. Everyone had someone. Everyone knew their place. He had no one, and he didn't know his place. He was grateful that Uncle Frank had welcomed him back after he broke his arm, but now he was leaving. How would the others treat him with Uncle Frank gone? Olivia certainly wasn't his greatest fan, and he guessed she'd give him an even harder time when Uncle Frank wasn't there to temper her. He sighed. He had no option but to hang around and put up with whatever came. Uncle Frank glanced at his watch. "It's time we hit the road." One by one, each person stepped forward to hug him and Maggie and wish them safe travels. Standing back to let the others go before him, Sean watched the loving exchanges and promises to check in. "We'll take care of everything, Dad. You don't have to worry about a thing," Olivia assured her father. Uncle Frank kissed her forehead and hugged her. "I know, Liv." Finally, it was Sean's turn. His uncle looked him in the eye. "Help take care of this place until we get back, Sean." A lump formed in Sean's throat. He swallowed hard. At least his uncle believed in him. "Of course, Uncle. You can count on me." Uncle Frank clapped a hand on his shoulder and smiled. "I know I can, son." That was the greatest affirmation Sean had ever been given. But could he live up to it? "Dad, before you go, can we pray for you?" Joshua interrupted, effectively ending the moment. Sean stepped back. He didn't want to be involved in this praying thing. It was all a load of hogwash as far as he was concerned. Uncle Frank nodded. "Well, that'd be great, thanks." The family gathered in a circle. Uncle Frank waved him over. He had no choice but to join them. They all bowed their heads. He did the same, although it felt stupid standing outside holding hands talking to someone he couldn't see. Joshua began praying, and that in itself felt weird, wrong. His cousin, with whom he shared so many adventures, praying. He shook his head as Joshua began. "Heavenly Father, watch over Dad and Maggie as they begin their trip. Keep them safe and let them have the most amazing time. May they be aware of your presence as they travel through this incredible land. Refresh them, Lord, and may they return richer and fuller in every way. Bless them, Lord. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen." Uncle Frank thanked Joshua for the prayer, as amen after amen followed, and the last of the hugs and well wishes were given. Finally, he and Maggie climbed into the cab. The engine roared to life, and moments later, they pulled out of the station with all the family waving and calling out their last goodbyes. The group lingered for as long as the truck and its turtleback camper were in sight. But once it was gone, and all that was left was a cloud of red dust, they began going their separate ways. Joshua headed in Sean's direction and walked in step with him. Not that Sean had anywhere in particular to be going, unlike the others who all had jobs to do. "Hey, Shauno," Joshua said. "Stella and I are about to head off, but come for a visit when you can." Sean looked up and smiled. "Oh, thanks, mate. I'll take you up on it as soon as I can. I'm looking forward to checking out your new digs." "Great." Joshua smiled and gave him a pat on the shoulder. "Take it easy, Shauno." "You too," he replied. Joshua headed to his truck where Stella stood waiting. They both climbed in and were gone a few minutes later. Sean released a heavy sigh and lifted his hat, wiping the sweat off his brow with the back of his hand. Although Joshua might welcome him at Indigo, he doubted Stella would, even though she'd told him she'd forgiven him. "God forgave us. Why can't we forgive you?" Her words echoed in his head. It was a conversation they'd had when she and Joshua had first returned from their honeymoon. But that kind of forgiveness and acceptance was foreign to him, and he would expect her to turn him away if he showed his face on their doorstep. So nope, he doubted he'd be paying Indigo Downs a visit anytime soon. Chapter 7. Excitement and anticipation filled Maggie the moment she and Frank headed down the track, leaving Goddard Downs and the family behind. She'd leaned out the window and waved until all she could see was dust. Despite the days of planning and preparation, she still found it hard to believe they were actually taking this trip. And it hadn't felt real until that last moment when they pulled away from the homestead and headed towards the open road. She reached across the console and squeezed Frank's hand. "We're off!" He turned and grinned like a Cheshire cat. Finally. Although she knew this part of the track like the back of her hand, travelling with the camper attached to the back of the truck meant Frank had to drive more slowly than usual to avoid the ruts, allowing her to take in the scenery with fresh eyes. She remembered the first time she'd driven along this road and how the vibrant colours had captivated her. The rich red earth, the burnt ochre of the rock formations that were as old as time, and the deep blue of the sky. The Kimberley had such stark contrasts from one season to the other. Balmy days with clear skies gave way to torrential rains that turned the firm earth to muck within seconds and turned rivers into raging torrents. "The bridge will help a lot when the rains come," she said. "It will," Frank agreed. "Let's pray that everything goes to plan while we're away. It'll be something to see when we return." "It sure will. No more helicopter flights just to go shopping. That will be a change." She chuckled lightly as she settled back in her seat to enjoy the scenery. Before long, the majestic Cockburn Ranges rose up ahead of them, framing the scenery like a work of art. A group of wallabies lifted their heads as they passed, and every now and then another vehicle came towards them, whipping up dust for them to drive through. Soon they came to the Pentecost River crossing. At this time of year, the river was shallow and easy to navigate, but during the rainy season, it would become treacherous and only the brave or stupid would try crossing it. Much like their river. Saltwater crocodiles were often sighted, so swimming was out of the question. As they approached the crossing, Maggie peered ahead, leaning forward in her seat while snapping photos. Frank slowed the vehicle to not much more than a walking pace as another vehicle, a large four-wheel drive towing a camper trailer, trundled across the river towards them. Frank lifted his hand as they passed each other. The gravel crunched under the tyres as he manoeuvred the rig into the water and across the riverbed. Every now and then they rolled from side to side as the truck drove over larger boulders that were hidden under the water. Maggie held on to the grab rail. Before long, they came up the other side. Frank pulled over so she could take some more photos. With the ochre range in the distance, the river reflecting the deep blue of the sky and the red road carving a path through the sparse vegetation on either side, it was a gorgeous picture, worthy of hanging in their living room. "It's so beautiful," she commented, "and there's plenty more like this to see along the way." Their first destination was Mitchell Falls, a 9-hour drive from the station, but they'd been told that the last section of the track was challenging and would be very slow going. So they decided to camp along the way and continue the following morning. The terrain grew drier and dustier as they continued along the Gibb River Road. Termite mounds in all shapes and sizes dotted the sparse land. Maggie had read that some mounds reached 7 metres high and could weigh 10 or more tonnes. She spotted a group of wild donkeys grazing on some tall grass. "Can we stop a minute, Frank?" she asked. "Sure." He pulled the rig onto the verge and turned off the engine. Maggie climbed out and tiptoed towards the donkeys. "Come on, Frank, I want you in the shot," she called softly, not wanting to disturb the animals. He gave a nod and followed her. "Where do you want me?" he whispered. "Over there." She pointed to a large termite mound. "Stand beside it and hold your hand out as if you're presenting. The donkeys will be right behind you. It'll make a great cover shot for our photo book." He chuckled indulgently. "Whatever you wish, my love." She grabbed his hand as he passed her. "Thank you." Lifting her hand to his lips, he kissed it gently. "Anything for you, Maggie." She exhaled a long sigh of contentment. This trip was already the best thing that had happened to them, and it was only day 1. He took his place right where she'd instructed. 5 donkeys stood together behind him, their coats varying in colour from pale tan to a dark grey that looked almost black. Maggie laughed as they raised their heads to look in their direction, as if posing for the camera. She took several shots. "Shouldn't you be in the photos as well?" Frank questioned. "Yes, but someone has to take them." "What about the tripod? I'm sure we packed it." Maggie glanced at the camper. "Yes, but I don't know where it is. I should have left it out." "We should get it. I don't want to be the only one in all the shots." "Okay, but you'll have to find it. I put it somewhere in the back, and I'm sure that you, Mr. Packing Expert, put it away so neatly I wouldn't have any chance of finding it." He grinned coyly. "That I most likely did. There's only so much space in there." She stepped towards him. "I know, but that's why you should go find it while I stay here and see what else there is to photograph." He chuckled. "You win." While he searched for the tripod, Maggie walked slowly through the tall grass. It rustled in the wind and tickled her legs. She'd worn stretchy denim shorts that came to just above her knees, and she was wearing her sturdy boots. It was unlikely she'd come across a snake, but it was better to be safe than sorry. A couple of wallabies raised their heads and twitched their noses while sniffing the air. Janella had told her during one of their lunchtime conversations that over 9 different species of wallabies inhabited this area, but which kind these were, Maggie wasn't sure. Still, she focused her camera and took several snaps as they nibbled on the grass. "Found it," Frank called. Within seconds, the wallabies hopped away. Frank made a face. "Sorry." "It's okay," Maggie replied. "I got some good shots." After he set up the tripod, she placed the camera on top and set the timer. "To the mound," she said. They hurried to get in place before the timer went off. Frank wrapped his arm around her shoulders as she nestled under his arm and hugged him tightly. She grinned as the camera timer chirped rapidly, followed by the sound of several images being taken. It was a lovely beginning to their trip. They travelled on, but with Maggie wanting to stop every few minutes to take photographs, the day quickly slipped by, and before they knew it, the sun was dropping towards the horizon. Frank suggested they find a place to set up camp for the night before darkness settled over the land. Maggie agreed. It was much easier to get things organised while they still had daylight to see by, especially on their first night. They found a spot beside a dry creek bed, a short distance off the road. Although it was listed in their guidebook as a camping spot, no one else was there. However, the fireplace looked like it had been used recently. Frank carefully parked the truck beside the dry creek, ensuring it was level. While he erected the awning on the side of the camper, she took several photos of the amazing sunset. Frank had assured her that erecting the awning was a one-man job and that he was okay doing it on his own. Several boab trees stood in the distance, sentinels of the arid land. Their sparse boughs rose into the air like arms to the heavens. Behind them, the sky was deep crimson and orange as the sun slipped slowly below the horizon. It was spectacular. "Are you seeing this, Frank?" she asked, her gaze focused on the horizon. "You should see it from where I'm standing," he called out. Turning around, she burst into laughter. He was staring at her. She immediately understood his meaning. "It looks good from this angle too," she said, grinning. She continued to take photos until the vibrant colours faded and darkness chased away the last remnants of light. Frank had gathered a bundle of loose timber from the surrounding area and was lighting a fire by the time she returned to the camper. She put her gear away and started dinner. They'd packed everything they needed to make their favourite meals, but Maggie had also packed some pre-prepared ones for when they wanted something quick and tasty. Like tonight. She pulled the chicken and pasta salad she'd made the day before out of the small fridge, grabbed some crusty bread, and placed both on the folding table Frank had set up outside the camper. "I'll grab the plates," he said. "Great, thank you." Returning moments later, plates in hand, he sat opposite her at the small table and smiled. "Thanks, my love. It looks delicious. Shall we say grace?" He held out his hand, which she took. "Heavenly Father," he began, "we pause to give you thanks for your many blessings, for this beautiful place, this wonderful country, for giving us each other, and for the chance to take this special trip, and for this food. In Jesus' precious name, Amen." He squeezed her hand and then let go. The night was slightly chilly, but the fire made it cosy and warm. Maggie gazed around as she nibbled on some bread. "It's wonderful out here." Frank nodded. "It sure is. There's nothing better than camping out like this, away from the crowds." "Do you ever wonder what it looked like as God was creating the world?" Maggie asked, the darkness around her reminding her of the story of creation. "I've never thought of it, to be honest, but I suppose it might have looked something like this." She looked up at the sky. Stars twinkled overhead, an errant cloud floated by. "If I could, I'd love to see what God sees. I'd want to know what he thought and saw as he was making everything. What he thinks of it now." Frank chuckled. "This is a very deep conversation for a first day. But I like where you're going." "I'm glad," Maggie said, smiling. "There's so much we don't understand, and I don't think we can in this life," he said. "The limitless wonder of God is simply too great for us to comprehend. But I believe he gives us glimpses and shares his heart with us when we give him the room to do so. We're so often consumed with living that we forget he's there." He looked at her. "Who knows? Maybe he wants to share something with you about his creation, and that's why he's on your mind now." She considered the statement. "Perhaps," she finally replied. "If he is, I'm ready to listen." "So am I," Frank said. "This trip is going to change a lot of things for us. I can feel it." She smiled broadly. She hadn't told him the feeling she'd had the past couple of days, the expectancy. Something was awaiting them on this trip. She didn't know what it might be, but whatever it was, it would change everything. She trusted God to see them through whatever lay ahead. They enjoyed the rest of their meal in silence, taking in the peace and solitude. Once the meal was over, they cuddled together in front of the fire. "Can we sleep out here tonight?" Maggie asked, snuggling closer. Frank brushed her hair gently with his hand. "We could. I did throw our swags in." "Great. I want to sleep under the stars tonight. I want the sky to be the last thing I see before I fall asleep, and the first thing I see when I wake up." He chuckled. "Then it's settled. Tonight we sleep under the stars. But first, let me kiss you." He lowered his face and his lips found hers. He kissed her gently while the fire crackled beside them and the stars twinkled overhead. Chapter 8. Darwin wasn't quite as bad as Janella had expected. It wasn't as daunting as she thought it might be, though there was plenty about it that was. The bus system, for one. Although she'd driven her Jeep the whole distance from Goddard Downs, she wasn't prepared to drive in the city. "Come on, Janella, or we'll miss the bus," Jonah called as he raced ahead of her. The boy's long strides took 2 of her shorter steps to keep up with, and when he was in a rush or excited, there was no slowing him. "We'll make it just fine," she replied, walking at her usual pace. "You said we'd miss it last night and we didn't. We won't miss it today either." "But today isn't yesterday. We could have just lucked out," he protested, walking back to her side as if his presence would spur her along. He was mistaken. "Jonah, I'm not making myself hot, sweaty and miserable, or worse, falling over just to please you. I'm sorry, but no. I'll keep my own pace, and I promise you, we won't miss the bus." He groaned but stayed beside her. She smiled as she glanced at him. He was a good boy, much like Caleb, and she wanted him to succeed. He hadn't had the same opportunities as Caleb, who'd had a loving and supportive family around him, but that meant Jonah's success was all the more special because he'd overcome those circumstances and was determined to make a life for himself. "I can't wait to get to the school. It's going to be great," he said for the 10th time that morning. He was so overjoyed with being accepted that it never occurred to him he might not like the place once they got there. Janella doubted she'd like it. She so easily got lost in buildings and corridors. If she arrived at an entrance other than the one she was used to when she visited Caleb, she often took the wrong path and had to ask for directions to find reception. Today, however, they weren't visiting Caleb. They were going to the Weber School of Arts and Sciences to inspect the campus and take a tour. They reached the bus stop in plenty of time, as she'd predicted. While they waited for the bus, she listened as Jonah continued to talk about the school and his excitement at going. The bus arrived and they took a seat near the front. She preferred being near the door, especially if there was a chance that the bus could become crowded. She hated the feeling of being bunched up with other people, especially ones she didn't know. "Keep still, Jonah," she whispered. He was leaning forward, hands clasping the rail in front of them as he peered past her out the window. He was almost like a kid in a lolly shop for the first time. "I'm just trying to see. It's so different to Kununurra." She looked out the window and had to agree. The streets were lined with fancy hotels and expensive-looking shops, nothing like those in Kununurra. The people even dressed differently, smarter, more fashionable. Some women even wore high heels. "Would you like to change seats?" she asked. His eyes widened. "Could we?" "Sure." The remainder of the ride was quiet as Jonah's eyes were glued to the window. They arrived at the campus 10 minutes later. She hadn't been sure what to expect, although she pictured in her mind an ugly concrete building. So when the bus pulled up in front of a large expanse of grass with a duck pond in the middle, she thought they were at the wrong stop. She leaned forward and asked the driver, "Are you sure this is the Weber School of Arts and Sciences?" "Yes, ma'am. This is it." As they disembarked, she thanked the driver for the safe ride. The man smiled and raised a hand as the doors closed. Standing on the grass, surveying the campus buildings in the distance, her stomach fluttered as if a whole family of butterflies had been set loose. If Jonah hadn't been with her, she would have jumped straight back onto the bus. He seemed nervous too. He stood there, jiggling his arms and legs. What they were embarking on was truly starting to sink in. Had she made a mistake thinking either one of them could fit in? Maybe they should just go home and forget all about the school. She glanced at him and slipped her arm around his shoulders. No, for his sake, she had to be the adult. "Come on, Jonah. Let's do this." They walked down a path towards the collection of one-storey buildings. The signage was clear and they found the vocational office easily. "Welcome to Weber," an attractive redhead greeted from behind a low counter. "How can I help?" Janella stepped closer. "I'm Janella Goddard, and this is Jonah Barenbar. We were both accepted into their culinary program." The woman pulled a large book from under the counter and flipped it open. She moved a long, painted fingernail down the page before looking up with a smile. "Yes, Mrs. Goddard, we're expecting you. Please have a seat over there. Someone will be with you shortly." Janella and Jonah sat together on two of the plastic seats lining the wall. A group of people were already seated. Some appeared to be of mature age, while others were obviously younger. Much younger. She assumed they were all there for the tour. "I feel nervous," Jonah whispered. She patted his arm gently. "You'll be fine." If only she could convince herself of the same thing. Their guide joined them a few minutes later, and as she suspected, the others seated nearby were also part of their group. By the time they started down the path, there were 15 in total taking the tour. Jonah stayed close to her at first, but quickly ended up with a group of boys and girls who appeared to be of similar age. "You look as nervous as I feel," a short blonde woman said. She was slender with a bright smile and youthful voice, but the strands of grey in her hair suggested she wasn't as young as she initially appeared. "Is it that obvious?" Janella replied with a tentative smile. "No, I just recognise it," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Kathy Tate." "Janella Goddard. Nice to meet you. Are you here for the commercial cookery course or something else?" "The commercial cookery course," Janella replied. "Me too. Looks like we'll be classmates." "Wonderful. I thought I'd be the only one here my age," Janella divulged. "I thought the same," Kathy replied. "I'm glad I was wrong." "Bill," she called to a tall, slender man with glasses. He was balding, and what remained of his hair was more salt than pepper. "Bill, this is Janella. She's taking the commercial cookery course as well." He turned and smiled. "Great, the more the merrier," he said cheerfully, extending his hand. "I'm William Winter, but you can call me Bill." "Nice to meet you, Bill. I'm Janella Goddard." "Where are you from?" he asked. "I live in the Kimberley on a cattle station," she replied. "A cattle station? That's a rough life. When I was a boy, I wanted to run away and become a cowboy," he said, laughing. "My mother quickly got that out of my head." "Where are you from?" Janella asked. "Originally from Sydney, but my family and I moved to Darwin 5 years ago. My wife, Alice, has family here." "Do you have children?" Janella asked, shifting her gaze between the two. "4, he answered. "One for me," Kathy said. Janella smiled. "I have 2, a son and a daughter." "Lovely," Kathy said, smiling. "It looks like we have even more in common." "I'm happy I decided to come. I was so nervous that I was thinking about refusing the offer." Bill's eyes widened. "You did? I felt the same, but my son told me I should go for it. I've always been the cook in the family and I wanted to try it professionally, but I was never brave enough. Now that most of the children are out of the house, I figured I could give it a shot." Kathy and Bill's confessions gave Janella hope. She wasn't the only one who'd considered quitting before they'd even begun. What a coincidence that they should be there together on that day. It was uncanny. "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord. "Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." She slowed as the words settled on her mind and her heart. Was this truly God's plan for her? Kathy stopped and turned around. "Janella, are you all right?" Janella drew a deep breath and smiled. "Yes, everything's just fine." Later that evening, as she and Jonah relaxed in their hotel room with takeout and movies, that verse stayed with Janella. Was culinary school truly the Lord's will for her? And if it was, what was his purpose for her going? What might follow once she finished? "What did you think of the school, Janella?" Jonah asked as he took another slice of pizza from the box and took a large bite. For someone so slender, he ate a great deal. "I think it was wonderful," she admitted. "I didn't expect the people to be so friendly or the campus to be so peaceful or beautiful." "What were you expecting?" "I don't know," she answered. She hadn't given it much thought. She simply felt that it wouldn't be for her. She'd never imagined that she'd like it. "Have you decided?" "I have. I'm definitely going. The place is neat, and I made some friends already." "So did I," Janella said, smiling. "Does that mean you're going to accept the offer and we'll be studying together?"
The hopefulness in his voice was unmistakable. He wanted her there, wanted her support, and she wanted to give it. There were plenty of reasons to accept. The campus wasn't as overwhelming as she thought it would be. She'd be closer to Caleb, and the course was only 2 years. Caleb would still be at school by the time she finished. But then he'd be going to university. The thought was jarring. Her son at university. She couldn't think that far ahead. And by that time, it would be Sasha's turn to attend boarding school like her brother, father and grandfather before her. And finally, Frank and Maggie were encouraging her to do it. Everything was pointing to her accepting the offer. But if she did, she'd have to find somewhere to stay. Having lived at Goddard Downs most of her life, she'd never had to look for accommodation. Where did one start? She had no idea. "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord. "Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." Really, Lord? If you want me to do this, you'll have to lead the way. She let out a big sigh. If I accept, we'd be able to share accommodation. I'm sure your father would feel better about that, plus it would cost him less. Jonah grinned. "So that means you're going to do it? You're going to accept?" She wanted to tell him yes, but she couldn't. She still wasn't sure. "I was just thinking out loud," she replied, weighing the options. "I'm part of your decision." "Of course you are, Jonah. You're like one of my children. How could I not consider you in all of this?" He smiled and leaned closer, resting his head on her shoulder. "Thanks, Janella." She smiled and patted the side of his head. "You're welcome. I promise you that no matter what, I'll be there for you. I won't let you down, even if you're here and I'm back at Goddard Downs. I know you'll make it here. You're going to be so successful." He lifted his head and looked at her. He was still so young in so many ways, though he was beginning to look a lot like the man he would become. "So will you, Janella. I know it." He took an audible breath. I love you, Janella. You're like a mum to me." Tears pricked her eyes. Jonah didn't know it, but God had used him to pull her out of the miry pit after Julian's death. Helping him had helped her heal and prepare to move forward. Now, she stood on the cusp of another life-altering event. She leaned forward and kissed his forehead. "I love you too, Jonah. Like a son." Chapter 9. The next day, which was a Saturday, Janella and Jonah were on the bus again, but this time they were on their way to see Caleb. With her future weighing heavily on her mind, she'd tossed and turned all night and had barely slept. If only she knew the right path to take. It was time to discuss it with her children, starting with Caleb. She'd told him she'd come to Darwin to check out the culinary school with Jonah, but hadn't told him she was considering going herself. The entire bus ride she was silent as she prayed for clarity and direction. Jonah seemed happy looking out the window. The bus dropped them off at the entrance she was familiar with, and within a few minutes, they came to the main reception area. "I can't believe your son goes to school here," Jonah said, his eyes large with wonder. The buildings and grounds were huge and impressive, with staircases and manicured gardens, sports ovals and grandstands. So different to the prefabricated classrooms and dirt playgrounds in Kununurra. "Believe me, you aren't the only one," Janella replied. She recalled the awe she'd felt during her first visit to the school. It was as far removed from their life on Goddard Downs as she could imagine, and she feared Caleb would be seduced by its grandeur and never want to come home, despite being adamant he would return to Goddard Downs one day and take over the running of the station. She smiled at that thought. Julian would have been so proud to hear him talk like that. The same man who'd been on duty when she last visited sat beside the reception desk. He looked up as she and Jonah approached. "Good morning. How can I help you?" His smile was practiced but warm, but then a glint of recognition flashed across his face. Caleb's mother, right? He asked as his smile grew brighter. Janella was taken aback. Yes, that's right. I remember you from your last visit, he said. I guess you're here to see your son? Yes, he knows I'm coming. I'll call him down. Just a moment, please. She nodded and took a step back as he picked up the phone and called someone. She presumed the dorm master. Moments passed as he nodded and hummed. He ended the call and looked up at Janella. Caleb will be down shortly. Thank you, she replied. You're welcome to take a seat. He waved to the row of chairs behind her. Great, thank you. She gave a nod and began ushering Jonah to the chairs when the man cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't get your name the last time you were here. Janella paused. Surely he had access to Caleb's records. And why did he want to know her name anyway? But he'd asked, and it would be rude not to respond. She turned around and said, Janella Goddard. I'm Wade Johnson. Caleb tells me you live on a cattle station. Yes, Janella replied tentatively. What was Caleb doing divulging personal information to a stranger? His face lights up when he talks about it, Wade said. Really? Yes, I can tell that's where his heart is. She nodded. It's the only home he's known. He also told me that his father passed recently. I'm so sorry. Wade spoke with compassion and empathy, and all of a sudden a lump formed in her throat. She swallowed hard. Thank you. It must be hard for you. He looked at her with such understanding that she wondered if he too had lost someone recently. It hasn't been easy, she admitted, but we're getting along. Something about him put her at ease, and she was even tempted to tell him her reason for visiting Darwin other than to see Caleb, but footsteps rushing down the stairs drew her attention. Seconds later, her son stood before her. Caleb! Mum, he said, wrapping his arms tightly around her. Let me look at you, she said, turning him around in a circle. He'd grown taller since the last time she'd seen him, but he also looked thinner. What are they feeding you? He laughed. No one cooks like you do, Mum, but the food here's not bad. I think I'll treat you to a big lunch. Try to fill up those long legs. She ruffled his hair and placed a hand on his shoulder, smiled at Wade, and then ushered him towards the door. See you, Mr. Johnson, Caleb called back, waving. Have a good day, Caleb. I'll be off duty by the time you get back. Caleb nodded. Have a good one. See you tomorrow. Good afternoon, Mrs. Goddard. Hope to see you again soon. Lifting a hand in a wave, Wade gave a smile that not only revealed his white teeth, but made her heart jolt. Her mouth went dry as their gazes briefly connected, and he gave a nod. Yes, you too. She quickly turned away and made a beeline for the door. What had just happened? Was he flirting with her? When Janella introduced Caleb and Jonah after exiting the reception building, they immediately hit it off and agreed they wanted pizza for lunch. Caleb said he knew a great pizza joint down at the jetty. Janella groaned, pizza again, but she sighed and gave in. They strolled the short distance to the waterfront and found the place Caleb had mentioned. The smell of Italian herbs, garlic bread and pepperoni wafted from the restaurant and made her mouth water. Perhaps she could grow used to eating pizzas more than once a year. They placed their order and sat outside at a table with a large umbrella. The harbour looked glorious, and since it was a Saturday, boats of all shapes and sizes were coming and going. She could sit there and people and boat watch all day, but that wasn't what she was there for. During the meal, she tried to bring up the subject of school, but she couldn't. They were having such a wonderful time, and she didn't want to ruin it with her doubts and misgivings. After the pizzas had been devoured, they strolled further along the jetty and came across an ice cream parlour. The boys pleaded with her to get one. Okay, but I don't know that I can fit one in. Come on, Mum. How often do you buy an ice cream for yourself? Caleb asked. She shrugged. The answer was never. These ice creams are the best. You won't regret it. She let out a sigh and chuckled. Okay. What flavour do you suggest? They stepped closer to the display cabinet. My favourite's cookie dough, but you might prefer salted caramel. Salted caramel? Yeah, I think you'd like it. She wasn't so sure. It seemed a strange combination. She'd heard of it but had never tried it, although she did like caramel, and she liked salt. She just never put the two together. "Okay, you've convinced me. I'll have salted caramel. Now, Jonah, what would you like?" His eyes were like saucers and her heart melted. He was having so many new experiences, and she was simply glad that she was there to witness them. "I'm not sure," he finally said. "There are so many to choose from." "Have the cookie dough with me," Caleb said. "Okay." Jonah smiled and looked relieved. Janella placed the order with the young girl behind the counter, and soon they each had an ice cream in their hands. The scoops were much larger than she'd expected, but the moment she took her first lick of the salted caramel, she knew she'd finish it. It was the most scrumptious thing she'd ever tasted. "Like it?" Caleb asked. She nodded as she caught a random dribble with her tongue. "It's delicious." "I thought you would think so." They continued walking, but finally she couldn't take it any longer. She had to talk to Caleb about the offer. "Let's go sit in the park for a while," she said when they came to the end of the jetty walk. They headed up a set of stairs and entered the park nearby. It overlooked the harbour and perhaps offered the best view she'd seen so far. She found a park bench and suggested they sit for a while. Jonah said he needed to go to the toilet. Janella wondered if he was just making an excuse to give her time with Caleb. After he left, she turned to Caleb and simply looked at him for a few moments. Why was it so difficult to speak with him about her going to culinary school? She had no doubt he'd tell her to do it, but that's what worried her. As soon as she told him she'd been accepted, there'd be almost no way out. Not that she really wanted one, but it was the first major decision she was making on her own. What if she made a mistake? "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. She swallowed hard and said, "Caleb, I need to talk to you about something." As she'd expected, he was ecstatic when she told him. "Mum, you have to take it. It'll be so cool having you and Sasha live in Darwin." "It isn't that simple," she said, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Why isn't it?" How could she explain? "I'm afraid. I don't think I can do it. I'm not good enough." She drew a deep breath. "It's complicated." "I don't think it is, Mum. My entire life you've done nothing but take care of other people. Dad, Sasha, me, everyone at home. Not once did I see you do anything for yourself." "What's wrong with that?" she replied. "Nothing, but maybe it's time you do." He paused and then added, "Dad would have wanted you to do it." Janella nodded slowly. "Yes, he would have. Plus, Mum, I want you here." Tears pooled in his eyes. "Caleb, I miss you." He sniffed and glanced away. "My friends are great and so's school, but it's not the same as having family around." He took her hands. "But it's more than that. I really think you'll do well. You're an amazing cook, and I think this is what God wants you to do." Tears of her own stung her eyes. Was this the confirmation she'd sought? "Dad thought you could do more. I think you can too. You can do anything you put your mind to, Mum. God will give you strength, just like he did me when I first came here." She nodded. God was her strength, and if this truly was the path he was leading her on, he would help her through it. She had to stop listening to the lies that told her she couldn't do it. The little voice that said she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't cut out for life in the big city. She could do it. In God's strength, she could. "You told me I had to come here when I wanted to stay home," Caleb continued. "You said that Dad believed in me. Well, he believed in you too. Doesn't that mean something?" "You truly think I can do it?" she asked softly. Caleb nodded. "You're my mum. You can do anything." Janella laughed and pulled him into a tight embrace. She needed to hear those words. It was the confirmation she needed. She squeezed him tighter and ruffled his hair. "Come on. We'd better go find Jonah." "So does that mean you're going?" Caleb asked. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I'll do it." He broke into a huge smile and threw his arms around her neck. "I love you, Mum. And I love you right back, Caleb." When they separated, Jonah was standing there, looking at them quizzically. "Come on, Jonah, you may as well join in." She waved him over. "I've decided. I'm accepting the offer." His face lit up. "Really?" She nodded. "Really." They walked back to the school a short while later. Wade wasn't there, but another man, lanky and stern-looking, waited for Caleb at the desk. She promised to see him again before she returned home. After leaving Caleb, she and Jonah did a bit of sightseeing, and when they returned to their hotel after dinner, he grabbed the remote to watch movies while she stepped out onto the balcony where it was quiet. She took her phone out and searched for Maggie's name amongst her contacts and composed a message. "Dear Maggie, having a great time here. The campus is much nicer than I imagined. I talked it over with Caleb and made up my mind. I'm going to accept the placement at Weber. I'm going to school. Love, Nella." She hit send and watched until the small tick appeared in the corner. She'd done it. There was no going back. Once Maggie knew, Frank would know also, and they'd never allow her to back out. She was going to attend culinary school. She was going to chase a dream she never knew she had. "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." She leaned against the rail and looked out across the city. The lights looked like stars bound to the earth, prevented from flying. She'd been that way her entire life, holding herself back because she didn't think she could fly. But the Lord said that He gave strength to the weak, and that those who waited on Him would renew their strength. They'd run and not grow weary. They'd walk and not faint. If other people could soar like eagles, then why couldn't she? It was time she tried. Chapter 10. Back on the road, the early morning sun cast its brilliance across the landscape. It was glorious. In fact, everything around Maggie was. It was as if the day was waking up, full of expectancy and wonder. "I'm glad you suggested we head out early. It's so gorgeous," she said, turning to face Frank. "And we should reach Mitchell Falls by mid-morning," he replied, smiling as he held his grip tight on the wheel as they bounced over the corrugations in the road. "Sounds good. I can't wait to see them." "You do know it's a 3-hour walk once we get there and 3 hours back," he cocked a brow. "So you've told me several times," she chuckled as she studied his profile. He was grinning, and it made her glad. Already he seemed so much more relaxed than he'd been in the days leading up to their departure. "Have I?" he asked. "Yes, you have. And I'm not worried. Are you?" "Nope. I'm fit and raring to go." 4 hours later, after manoeuvring over and around numerous culverts in the track and bouncing around as if they were on a ride at a fairground, they reached the final turnoff to the Mitchell Falls camping grounds. Maggie hoped the eggs she'd packed had survived. The campground catered mainly for tent campers and off-road camper trailers. The road wasn't suitable for caravans, and now Maggie knew why. The truck had handled the road well, however, just as Frank said it would. She was glad their camper was on the back of the truck and they weren't towing. It made everything so much easier. The sites were clearly designated, so after self-registering at the box, they chose one that was in part shade, part sun. They needed sun for their solar panels, but part shade was also good, since it was already past 30 degrees and climbing. Hopping out of the cab, Maggie took in her surroundings, shading her eyes with her hand. She liked it immediately. The campground was spread out, so even though other campers were there, it didn't seem crowded. She'd not been to Mitchell Falls before, although it had been on her bucket list of places to visit for many years. Cliff had suggested they take a cruise along the coast from Darwin and fly in on a helicopter.
She'd thought that was a lazy way of seeing the falls and said she'd rather camp and hike. Consequently, they never went. But now, she was so glad that she and Frank were getting to do it together. While he quickly set up the solar panels and checked that everything was working correctly to charge their batteries, she made coffee and sandwiches to take on the hike. She checked her laces and grabbed her backpack from the front seat of the truck. "Are you ready?" she asked as he did a final adjustment to the panels. He'd brought an extra long cable so they could be further from the truck and catch as much sun as possible during the day. "I think so. I'll grab my pack and I'll be good to go," he replied. Moments later, he stood beside her with his pack slung over his shoulders and buckled across his chest. It was pre-packed with everything they'd need for the hike other than food, which she was carrying. First aid kit, spare clothes, and water. He slipped his arm around her shoulders and kissed her cheek. "Let's go, my love. I can't wait to see these falls." They walked to the trail entrance and started along the dusty track that ran between sparse, low-lying vegetation. The path veered left, and they soon came across a rocky outcrop. The rocks had been worn smooth by persistent rains, and lush green vegetation had found a gap to spring up between them. There were places where walking was easy, and others where they had to hop from rock to rock. They stopped several times to take photos along the way, the untamed scenery the perfect backdrop. Despite the wildness of the land, markers along the way ensured they stayed on the trail. They stopped at Little Merton's for more photos. Little Merton's was a small curtain of water that cascaded over sandstone into a pool below. It was an hour from the campground, but it took them half an hour longer with the number of photo stops. They lingered near the top, looking down into the dark water. "These lands are spiritually significant to the Wanamble people," Frank commented, gazing into the pools. "Don't go near the edge, Maggie." Hearing the alarm in his voice, she edged back a little but continued to take shots. "That's their rock art?" she asked, focusing her camera on the drawings etched onto the rock face. "Yes," he answered. "The Wanamble are Janilla's people." She stopped shooting. "Really? I didn't know that." He nodded. "Ancestrally, at least. Her family stopped practicing their beliefs a generation or more ago, but she was raised to understand the significance of the land as well as the love of God." "Sounds like the perfect mix," Maggie replied, lowering her camera to her side. "Sometimes I think all of our modern ways have pushed us further and further from the life God intended." "I think that way too sometimes," Frank said. He uncapped his flask and took a sip of water. "We should press on if we want to get to the falls and back before dark." She nodded her agreement and they set off again. 3.5 hours later, they arrived at the falls. Although the walk had been tiring, the sheer beauty of the falls and the cascading pools made her forget her aching muscles and sore feet. "This is amazing, Frank. I'm so glad we came." When he didn't respond, she turned around. He was sitting on a rock with a bottle of water to his head. He looked a little pale and was breathing hard. She hurried to him and squatted down. "Are you okay, Frank?" He nodded. "Oh, just a little peachy." She frowned as she cast her gaze over him and placed a hand on his forehead. He felt cool to touch, so it wasn't a fever. "Maggie, I'm fine," he assured. "It was a bit more of a hike than I expected. It's been a long time since I walked that far." She chuckled. "We should have started our exercise regime sooner." "Seems that way. But you made it look like a walk in the park." Grinning, he took her hand and kissed it. "I'm not so sure about that. I think I'll pay for it tonight." "Come sit by me," he said, patting the rock next to him. She removed her pack and lowered herself carefully onto the rock. It was such a gorgeous day. The sky was an azure blue with not a cloud in sight. Children were laughing and splashing in the clear water while their parents looked on. It was idyllic. When Frank slipped his arm around her shoulders, she leaned against him, relishing the warmth of his embrace. "Let's stay for a while," she said. "It's so peaceful and beautiful." "I'd like that," he said, rubbing her arm gently. She couldn't think of a more magical place. As she gazed across the falls, Psalm 145 came to mind. I will exalt you, my God the King. I will praise your name forever and ever. Every day I will praise you and extol your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. His greatness no one can fathom. Yes, Lord. Thank you for this amazing place. Its beauty speaks of you, its creator. No one is like you, O Lord. My heart swells with praise and gratitude as I think of your immense greatness, and I humble myself before you. As Maggie rested against Frank's shoulder, the sounds of nature permeated her heart and soul while the sun warmed her body. When a rock wallaby appeared on an outcropping, she grabbed her camera, quickly focusing the lens before she took a shot. Finally, it was time to start the trek back to the campsite. They didn't want to risk being out after dark. Frank took his time, and Maggie slowed her pace to match his. It surprised her that the hike was taking so much out of him, but decided not to mention it. He was already feeling threatened by David's arrival at Goddard Downs, and she didn't want to make him feel any worse, but the fact remained. They were both getting older, and at some stage Frank might need to modify his role on the station and hand some of the more physical jobs over to the younger ones. But would he? She somehow doubted it. He'd try to keep up with them for as long as he could, even if it killed him. That thought jolted her. What if his breathlessness was something more than simply being a little out of condition? She shook her head. No, there was nothing wrong with Frank. They just needed to slow down a little, take it a bit easier. They reached the campsite just after sunset. There was still enough light to see where they were going, but only just. Smoke from campfires filled the air while cockatoos squawked in the trees as they settled in for the night. Holding hands, Frank and Maggie headed for their camper. Another rig similar to theirs was parked in the next bay. The occupants were sitting in fold-out chairs around a small fire. Maggie nodded and smiled as they passed by. Oh no, Frank muttered. What's wrong? She looked at him, her brow crinkling. He shrugged off his pack and set it on the ground. I didn't pick up any firewood before we left. I'll go find some now. She rubbed his arm. Don't worry about it, Frank, it's fine. We can sit inside tonight. After a 6-hour hike, the last thing she wanted him to do was forage for firework in the dark. Facing her, he smiled, his eyes twinkling. I was looking forward to another night under the stars. She grinned. That would be nice, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of other nights to stargaze. Okay, so long as you're sure. I am, she said. Now, perhaps you should go for a shower while I get dinner. Are you saying I smell? She chuckled. Just a little. Well, I never. Laughing, he shook his head. Excuse me, a female voice called out. Maggie and Frank both turned. The couple they'd passed were walking towards them. Hello, Maggie said, smiling. Hi, the woman replied. She was plump with silver hair and cheeks so rosy they stood out in the semi-dark. Hello, Frank said. How can we help? We wanted to help you, the woman said. Oh, Frank replied. We heard you say you don't have any firewood, the man said, his voice soft but raspy. We've got more than enough, so we brought you some. He held out an armful of thick branches and twigs. Thank you, Frank said. That's very kind of you. It's no problem at all, the woman replied. I'm Mabel Henry, and this is my husband, Ned. I'm Frank, and this is my wife, Maggie. Each couple shook hands. Nice to meet you both, Mabel replied. We always make sure we have more than enough wood so we can share if someone's in need. The cheerfulness in her voice made Maggie smile. That's very thoughtful. Thanks again. You're welcome, and you're welcome to join us for dinner if you'd like, Mabel continued. We're having chicken soup, nothing fancy, but there's more than enough to go around. It'll save you having to cook. Maggie turned to Frank and spoke in a quiet voice. What do you think, Frank? Should we accept?
"Sure, why not?" he replied.
Maggie nodded and told Mabel they'd love to join them. Chicken soup sounds wonderful. We can bring some crusty bread. That would be lovely, dear. Ned's partial to crusty bread, Mabel answered. Come over when you're ready. Great, thank you. We won't be long. A short while later, after they'd both showered, they walked the short distance to Mabel and Ned's. Sitting at the table enjoying a bowl of warm, tasty soup and crusty bread, Maggie learned that the pair were doing the big loop and planned to travel around the country over the period of a year. They didn't have a tight schedule. In fact, they simply went wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Maggie marvelled at their plan. That's wonderful, she commented. I can't imagine travelling for a whole year, not knowing where you'll be from one day to the next, but it sounds exciting. It is, Mabel replied. We're Christians, and although we don't know where we're going, God does, she chuckled. You're Christians? So are we. Really? We had a feeling you might be. This trip isn't only a vacation for us. When we decided to do it, we asked God to use us in whatever way He saw fit, whether that's supplying firewood and a meal, changing a flat tyre, or perhaps even sharing the gospel. That's amazing, Maggie said. I'm so impressed and inspired. She couldn't contain the excitement welling inside her. Would you tell us your story? She asked. Certainly, Ned replied, leaning closer to his wife of 50 years. He wrapped an arm around her, and Maggie could see that even after so many years of marriage, the love between the couple was still strong. Maggie shuffled her chair closer to Frank, resting her head on his shoulder as Ned told their story. We were living in Adelaide and attending church there. We'd both been feeling that something was coming into our lives, but we didn't have any idea what. Then Mabel had a dream about us travelling. I thought she was crazy, but then I had the same dream a few weeks later. That's when we decided to pray on it, Mabel interjected, a big grin on her face. Ned continued, Yes, we prayed on it, and months later, we got an answer when one of our daughters surprised us with a gift of money and told us to use it for a vacation. She wasn't sure what prompted her to do that other than a prompting from the Lord. He squeezed Mabel's hand. We then knew it was what the Lord wanted and that it was time to move. We bought this rig and left home 3 months ago. Since then, we've been going wherever the Lord leads us, using our time to minister to those we meet. Maggie looked up at Frank. His eyes were bright and fixed on Ned as he spoke, and there was a grin on his face. You spend your days travelling and ministering to people? He asked. Yes, Ned answered, nodding. We always wanted to be missionaries, but going overseas never seemed to fit into our plan, Mabel explained. Now we're doing it, but differently. We're ministering to those who need to hear the word, or we give a helping hand right here at home. Ned squeezed her hand. You'd be surprised how many people here in our own country don't know or don't want to know about the Lord. We take the opportunity whenever we can to share the gospel. That's a noble task you've undertaken, Maggie commented. I'm sure God's blessing you abundantly. Yes, we feel very blessed, but that's not why we do it. I'm sure. And Maggie was. This couple exuded genuine joy in their mission to share the gospel with strangers, to offer a helping hand when needed, and to minister whenever a need arose. She squeezed Frank's arm gently. Perhaps the Lord had something similar in mind for them. That night, as they settled down to sleep inside their camper, Maggie couldn't help but think about what God might have in store for them.
Slow Trek to Triumph continues in Volume 2, Chapters 11 to 20. Click the link below to keep listening.